On the red horizon the sky was covered with a huge column of smoke. On a rock overlooking the ground stood a man in a cloak. There were people behind him and he said it was coming. Ragged wings flapped in the air. Monsters with sharp teeth and covered with scars flew through the air. Among the small red dragons, a huge something with bare ribs was flying. Someone said it was the king of dragons, Gorntile. He had 3 heads and bones protruding from his case. The girl with white hair said that it looks like Centaur's nest has fallen. Her white cloak fluttered in the wind and she said that they had nothing else to rely on. She said the Cygnus Knights, the Resistance, the Cross Hunters, all the adventurers and the 6 heroes that the people saw as their hope are all dead. The wind blew leaves through the air around her. Looking at the back of the guy with dark hair, the girl said that he was the only one left. The guy turned around and she said that he was the last adventurer, El Palm. She urged the people around to go. A huge shadow hung over the rock on which they stood. Gorntile opened its huge mouth wide as it approached them. The girl said that this was their last adventure. El was on fire and the smoke covered the sky. El Palm was covered in blood. He was kneeling on the ground, strewn with human corpses. In front of him lay the bloody head of Gorntile on the ground with its tongue hanging out and lying on the ground. Raising his head, El Palm wondered if it was all over for him. Flying in the sky under a huge full moon was Gorntile, who still had his remaining 2 heads. Looking at the monster's neck, El Palm thought that it was regenerating the head that he cut off and it was all in vain. Gorntile swished his tail in the air. It opened its mouth wide with its eyes glowing red. The protagonist's gaze was absent. He closed his eyelids tiredly and thought that this was the end of him. On his knees, he thought that this was the end of the world and their adventures. Suddenly, cursing loudly, he slammed his fist onto the ground. Sitting amidst the raging flames, he punched a small crater in the ground with his fist, gritting his teeth and bulging his reddened eyes. El Palm thought, as if this is how it all ends. He remembered Philip being torn apart by one blow. He remembered how he held Jaden's bleeding hand. He remembered how Alexis pushed him out from under the dragon's mouth. Remembering her smile with tears in her eyes, the protagonist thought that they all sacrificed themselves. Raising his head up, he screamed loudly. As he struggled to his feet, he thought that he could not accept this. Raising his bloodshot eyes, he looked at Gorntile. Raising his palm to the sky in which the monster was flying, El Palm thought that it could not end like this. Energy flared in his palm, and yellow energy swirled around him. A yellow magic arrow appeared above his head. The main character shouted that he would do it no matter what. The flow of energy around his hands suddenly stopped. The spell around him crumbled and blood gushed out of his mouth. Blood spilled from his mouth onto the ground. Gorntile flashed a purple flash within himself. A stream of energy shot out from its huge mouth. A huge stream of destructive energy was approaching the main character. He wondered why it had to end this way. He thought, if only he were stronger. He wondered if he could just have one more chance. Someone rudely shouted at him to wake up. El Palm opened his eyes wide. Water was poured in his face. He stared into space in amazement, wearing shackles. The man shouted at him that pretending to be sick wouldn't work. With his arms folded across his chest, he said with hostility on his face that he should know his place as a slave. The main character thought, what about Gorntile? His eyes widening in amazement, he thought that he was alive. Someone said that these guys that were brought in recently are great for long-distance dungeons. Moving his shackled hands, he thought about this place. There were a lot of people walking around the cages, some asking questions about the people in them, and some diligently selling them to them. The main character thought it was a slave market. He opened his mouth, breathing heavily, and couldn't believe it. Looking around, he thought that the slave market had been abolished a long time ago. The man, gritting his teeth, said that for a slave he had a good desire to survive. El Palm thought about this merchant. Looking at him, he thought that this was the merchant who had been in charge of him 6 years ago when he was a slave, and this was definitely the same person. The salesman furrowed his eyebrows. The main character thought that he really returned to the past. The seller, raising his fist, asked what he was looking at. The fist was rapidly approaching the protagonist's face. That day he returned to the very beginning of all stories. There was dried blood under El Palm's nose. He wondered if he was dreaming right now. He thought no, because it was too realistic. The salesman told the white-haired man that all the guys here were slaves meant to be used as bait, so he could choose anyone. The main character thought that he couldn't believe it, but there was no other explanation. The seller said with a smile that they were in good shape and they had just recently received them. The man said he would take both. Frowning resolutely, El Palm thought that there was no reason for him to think too much into this. After all, this was his second chance. Standing in the forest, he picked up his staff from the ground. Looking at the staff, he thought that it was a staff for fire arrow, and it was not a bad skill, putting it behind his back. The main character thought that it was perfect for his skill level right now. Walking among the trees, he thought that this was not enough, because the adventurer must have more than just weapons. Otherwise, there was no point in coming back here. He noticed a severed leg on the ground, lying in a pool of blood, pulling his foot out of his boot. El Palm thought that sometimes people hide valuables in their shoes. Finding a blue ring, he put it on his finger. Looking at the ring shrouded in light blue energy, he thought it was a telekinesis ring. The main character turned around sharply. Monsters with large teeth were rapidly approaching him between the trees. Holding his spear at the ready, he asked if they smelled blood. The monster kicked the ground with force. Having completely surrounded El Palm, they rushed to attack. The main character, waving his spear, cut the monster into pieces. A tongue of one of the monsters shot forward. He grabbed the protagonist's spear. He squeezed the wooden handle of the spear and broke it in half. El Palm opened his mouth in amazement. The monster was approaching him from behind, its mouth wide open, lined with sharp teeth. The main character used a fire arrow. A flame broke out. Armed with a fire staff, he punched a hole in the monster's body with a fire arrow. Squinting his eyes, he thought that he would try out the ring at the same time. A fiery arrow cut the air. El Palm waved his hand, shrouded in a blue glow. A fiery arrow flew around and through the monsters surrounding him. Gradually the spell began to dissipate in the air. The main character, enveloped in fire, thought that he could not maintain it for too long. The monsters looked at him with their yellow eyes. Standing in a fighting stance, El Palm thought it didn't matter. He opened his eyes in amazement. After dodging the monster's attack, he thought that the fire arrow was not working. Looking at his staff, he thought that it didn't look broken and it seemed to be cooldown. The main character jumped away from the monster, which opened its mouth. He landed on the ground. Swinging his staff, he hit the monster in the face with it and thought that he had no other choice. He continued to strike the monster with his staff, using it as a melee weapon. El Palm kicked the monster. The monster flew to the side, hitting the ground. The main character thought how much longer. The flames engulfed his staff again. The monsters immediately rushed to attack, opening their slobbering mouths. El Palm frowned decisively. He shot a fire arrow forward. Using the telekinesis ring, he thought, one more time. Using telekinesis, he pierced the crowds of monsters standing in front of him. The main character looked at the hole in one of the dead monsters. He stood surrounded by dead monsters shrouded in flames. A girl with dark hair, bleeding, called out to him. She said he was no ordinary slave. The main character turned around. Looking at her, he realized in amazement that she was alive. The girl, gritting her teeth, asked who he was, because he wields a spear and magic. El Palm thought she was lucky, or rather unlucky. The girl asked why he had this staff. She asked why he had that thing on his wrist. Frowning her brows, she asked how he managed to awaken as a simple slave. They were surrounded by bloody corpses of people. The girl asked if this was his plan. The main character looked at her with a cold gaze. The wind blew his dark hair. The leaves of the trees rustled in the wind. He asked if she was done talking. He apologized and said that she had made a mistake. He said that if he had planned it, nothing would have changed and he would have killed them all anyway. The girl asked what kind of nonsense this was. A shadow covered her face and she clenched her teeth. El Palm, surrounded by flames, said that he was sick of people who used slaves as bait. The sun was shining over the city. The guy said in amazement to look there. Worn boots walked on the stone tiles. The main character was walking along a city street, and people exclaimed that the bait slave had returned on its owl. Palm thought that the dice had already been rolled and he needed to hurry to avoid the same fate. He stood in front of a large building with flags. Frowning determinedly, he thought that he needed to free himself first. Clouds floated across the sky above the building. The man said that the slave returned alive. The man standing in front of him said that everything was correct. He said he was reported to have arrived unharmed. A boss asked what was wrong with this and if there was anything unusual about the decoy slave returning uninjured. He flicked the ash off his cigar, and the man said that all the adventurers from the team he was on died in the gate. A boss asked if he wanted to say that he survived alone. After exhaling tobacco smoke, he said that it was really strange. He said he decided to file a report rather than run away. He said those who became slaves due to huge debts could not escape the fate of being used as bait again. A boss said since he didn't try to escape, it means he realizes how difficult it is to hide from them. He said that in the end, for them, death is the only way to freedom. He clasped his hands in front of his face. Light shone through the windows behind him, and he said that this was how business was conducted in their trade guild, Gaffer. He asked if it was really necessary to report such trifles to him. The man, closing his eyes, said that there was something else he needed to know. He said that he was informed that this slave had awakened the first circle. A boss, moving in surprise, exclaimed in amazement. He asked about the decoy slave with the circle. Wrinkling his brow, he thought that he must have a bad opinion of their guild since he had been a slave. The man said that he was told that he was asking to change his contract. He said he wanted to register as an adventurer. A boss, his eyes bulging, opened his mouth in shock. He asked who he thought he was, placing his hand on his chest. The man said that Rakan wanted him to personally handle the situation. Jumping up from his seat, a boss slammed his hands on the table and asked what Rakan himself wished so. He wondered why the executive head of the guild would be interested in a slave. Shadowing nervously, he clenched his teeth. He looked at the stack of books lying on his desk. The door to his office closed. An unextinguished cigar lay in the ashtray. Turning to the window, a boss spoke thoughtfully about a decoy slave eager to become an adventurer. Under Queen Cygnus, the status of a slave shall not exist. However, this is only conditional. People have always been slaves to money. Those who could not pay the debt on time were obliged to work it off. This simple law introduced outcast slaves into the world of Maple. When the protagonist's father, the only family he had, passed away from illness, he became one of them. He purchased the ingredient black moss from the Gaffer Trade Guild to cure his father, promising to pay later. The guild demanded 1,000,000 miso, which was several times the market price. Palm, dressed in rags, stood in the courtroom before the judge. The judge said the defendant failed to pay Gaffer Trade Guild 1,000,000 miso on time. The main character opened his eyes wide. The judge, striking his gavel, said that he would therefore have to do work for the guild within a set time. For 6 years these people exploited him. It's time to take revenge. Palm sat at the table opposite a boss. After introducing himself, he thought it was a boss, a loyal servant of Rakan, one of the executive heads of the guild. A boss said he has heard that he wants to make changes to the contract. He suggested getting straight to the point because he had already been told enough about it. He put the cup on the saucer, frowning. He said that he would register him as an F-rank adventurer. The main character thought that he agreed to his proposal quite easily. Smiling, he thanked him and thought that it seemed like it was because of this. A boss looked at him intently. Palm said that he requires an E rank. He thought that the game would not go according to his rules. A boss said that he was not even officially recognized by the Adventurers Association. The protagonist said that he had passed through the gate as a decoy slave hundreds of times over the past 3 years. A boss said that it was true, but he was still new to being a bait and killing monsters. Palm asked since when were adventurers judged by their ability to hunt monsters, frowning. He said that the first adventurer had earned great fame due to his survival skills. He said that the main goal of any adventurer is to return alive from the journey. A boss thought that this was true, and the information that a survivor would bring was more valuable than military merit. He said it was reasonable, taking something out of his bosom. He said that, to be honest, the fact that he survived and returned many times as a decoy was a great achievement, but that was all because decoys were only taken into the gates of the lower level. He asked if he really believed that his meager survival skills would save him in a high-level gate. Taking out a cigar, Abbas said that he was greatly mistaken if he took them for fools who would sign a contract with a self-confident fool. He thought that he was a fool, and if he continued to overestimate himself, he would die very soon. The main character opened his eyes, and Abbas thought that his intuition was telling him something about him. He said there was a gate with a limit of 5 people and 12 marks on the barrel. El Palm looked at him, laughing. Abbas said it was true. He said that this meant that at least 12 groups of 5 went in there and never returned. The protagonist frowned and Abbas told him to prove that he was worthy of the rank he was asking for. Holding the contract in his hand, he said with a grin that if he succeeded, it would grant him his wish. The tree branch in the forest glowed slightly. Several guys in armor stood in front of the main character, and they said that he must be the newbie who will join them. The guy with blonde hair and green eyes said with a smile that his name is Chef and he is the tank of their team. He said that Abbas told him that he was a decoy slave. Pointing his thumb at the rest of the team, he said not to worry about it because he didn't care and neither did his comrades. The main character said that he was glad to meet you. Chef said that he heard that he can use fire magic. El Palm said yes. The guy with dark skin grinned and asked if not all magic is available to magicians. Chef said no, and they can only control the element they are born predisposed to. He said with a smile that it was therefore useless for them to take an item that did not match their element. Turning back, he said that he had gotten off topic and, as he probably already knew, their goal on this mission was not to hunt monsters. He said that they needed to return the items that had been dropped by the other 12 teams that had come here before them. Smirking, Chef said that this would be the end of their work and the guild was ready to pay 3,000 miso for each item. The guy with dark skin, sighing, said that this was a robbery because they would have been left without items at all if not for them. Besides, those adventurers had 1 circle each, which means their items cost at least 7,000. The guy in the armor told him to stop complaining. The guy exclaimed that he wasn't complaining. Chef asked if everyone was ready. There was something red among the sheets and he said it was time to make money. The fog hovered on the ground among the trees. A guy with dark skin said that it was bright here but still creepy. Chef said that it is very likely that the mission will take a long time. Judging by the terrain, it is necessary to set up camp. The guy suggested setting up camp at the top of a tree because there were many branches behind which they could hide and it would be more convenient to look for a better place from above. Chef responded that it was a good idea. They threw the rope and tools to the ground. A guy with dark skin, putting his hand on the main character's shoulder, raised his thumb up and said that he can rest for now because he and that guy are experts in construction. After some time, a wooden platform with a ladder appeared on the tree. Chef said that now that everything is ready, they will split into 2 groups and explore the area. He said that Tom, Max, and Roa will go together. He said that he and Al Palm would check the west side and they would check the east side. He told them if anything happened to immediately sound the signal and quickly return to base. Chef and the main character walked through the forest. Chef said there weren't any monsters here and they were probably camping too close to the entrance. He said that tomorrow they would go deeper into the forest. Al Palm had an indifferent expression on his face and Chef asked how he was enjoying his first assignment as an adventurer. The main character said that he was nervous. Chef laughed and said that he understood him. He said that he still worries every time he enters the gate although he has gained a little experience and he is still not the bravest person in the world. The wind blew leaves through the air and he said that he continues to boldly step forward because he is surrounded by people who matter to him and he does not know how it sounds from the outside, but all his comrades are really good. Lit in orange light, he said he really felt sorry when he first heard his story and he couldn't even imagine how hard it was for him. Turning around, Chef said that if he wanted, he could join them. The main character silently looked at the ground. There was some kind of mark on the ground and Chef, laughing, told him not to take his words too seriously. They reunited around the fire and the guy asked about how they hadn't found anything either. Another guy asked if he thought they would find them that easily. Chef, chewing meat, asked if they could do without talking about work at least while eating. The main character took a sip from the flask. The full moon was shining over the forest in the night sky. The wooden platform creaked in the wind. The guys approached the protagonist's sleeping bag. Chef, holding a torch in his hand, asked if he was sleeping. Alpon did not respond. A guy with dark skin put his hand on Chef's shoulder and asked what the question was. He said with an evil grin that they all knew he was too fast asleep to answer. He said he was too careful. He asked if he had forgotten what they put in his dinner because the stuff was powerful enough to put a giant mushroom to sleep. The guy said he literally ate the whole thing and was lucky to be alive. Laughing, he said that they would get at least 10,000 for his fire arrow staff. Raising the dagger, the guy with an evil smile said that it was time to get down to bed, He plunged the dagger into the fabric. The guy opened his eyes in amazement, and Chev asked what was the matter. Kicking up the cloth, under which there was a log and pillows, the guy said that he was not here. They exclaimed in amazement that this could not be. Turning around, Chev ordered to find him because he must be somewhere nearby. There was a strong explosion right in front of his feet. The main character watched from another tree as the platform burned down. Chev said to save food and other valuables faster. He asked if Alpom did it. The guy with dark hair pointed to the side in amazement, calling out to him. Chev turned around irritably. A huge yellow monster looked at him with its huge eye. Turning pale, Chev swore. The monster opened its mouth wide and Chev shouted that he was using them as bait to lure the monster out. They jumped off the platform. A giant monster destroyed the platform. Alpom thought he was a terrible actor and he shouldn't have been kind if he wanted to trick him. As he watched them run away, he thought that this gate had killed 12 teams and they had welcomed a former decoy, not someone with more experience, with open arms. He thought that everything was extremely obvious. Looking at the monster, he thought that he had correctly guessed that this monster was the boss of the dungeon. The monster quickly rushed in pursuit, uprooting trees. Chev, breathing heavily, swore and said that this was the worst type of monster for them. The guy with dark hair asked if he knew anything about it. Chev said that if he's not mistaken, it's golden slime. He said that his body is made of acid, making him the worst enemy for them fighting in close combat. Frowning, he turned around sharply. The bright yellow liquid hit the ground with force and he jumped to the side. The guy with dark hair swore in amazement. He exclaimed that it also attacks from a distance. Chev said it's an acid arrow, an ability that shoots acid. The guy with dark hair, trembling, exclaimed that this was not fair. Chev shouted not to panic because it was coming again. The monster hit the ground and they, running away, asked what they would do and how they could defeat it. Chev said they will move out of range first, and the acid arrow has a 1-minute cooldown. He said that you need to get into battle formation and destroy the core located in the center of the monster's head. Gritting his teeth, the guy with dark skin said about reloading. Max jumped into the attack and asked what they were waiting for then. Jumping high into the air, he shouted that he would kill him right now. Chev shouted to him to wait, because they needed to act together. The monster shot acid and Max was torn in half. Chev's eyes widened in amazement. The monster looked at them with huge eyes and he said that the reload time still had 10 seconds left. Leaning forward, the golden slime opened its mouth and shot out another stream of acid. The acid destroyed the boys' bodies down to the very bones. The main character, standing behind a tree, thought that they were finished. He thought with a cool look that, in theory, Chev was right. He thought that the golden slime became stronger with each item it absorbed, and it was expected that the cooldown time could decrease. The monster swallowed objects, and Elpom thought about his unpredictable growth and ability to shoot acid arrows without reloading. He thought that he seemed to understand why the previous teams died, and this monster was out of their league. The acid trail left by the monster was corroding the ground, and the protagonist thought that in this state he would be able to hold out in this yellow gate, which is 2 levels below the red one, when he doubts that adventurers with 1 circle can defeat him. Taking a step away from the tree, he thought that no objects could be returned from this gate, and the task was over. He remembered Abbas who said to prove it to him. Elpom chuckled. A huge yellow slime was crawling through the forest. Squinting, the creature turned around. A strong blow hit the monster, spraying mucus in different directions. The earth melted under the spray of acid. The monster's bulging eyes turned red and he growled. The main character, standing on a tree branch, said that he was aiming for the core, but he had impressive magic resistance. Looking at the monster's wound, he said that it would take at least 4 more shots, even 5, to defeat it. Having tied himself with a rope, he thought that this was not a problem. El Palm grinned and said that he wouldn't mind getting the proof. The monster began to shoot acid in all directions. The slime hit the tree, and the main character jumped to the ground. The monster shot acid, its mouth wide open. The main character was dodging, tied with a rope. Gritting his teeth, he frowned. The ring on his finger lit up with blue energy. Having plunged a dagger, shrouded in blue energy, into a tree, he thought that each shot should land in the same place, and this is something a simple magician can only dream of. The flame enveloped his staff, and he thought that he was not an ordinary magician, because in his past life he was called the greatest telekindist. He pulled the magical string on his staff and activated the fire arrow. The spell hit the monster with an explosion. The main character thought that 4 more hits were needed. The monster shot an acid arrow at him. El Palm began to run quickly along the tree trunk. Pushing off from the tree, he found himself in the air again, and the acid hit the tree trunk. His ring glowed and he activated the fire arrow again. The spell hit the monster's head, and the main character thought that there were 3 hits left. With its bottomless mouth wide open, the monster spat acid randomly, and the main character dodged by manipulating the rope with the help of telekinesis. He hit the monster's head with a fire arrow and thought there were 2 more hits left. El Palm used the fire arrow again, but the slime dissipated before the spell hit the monster. Pushing away from the tree, he thought it was dodging, and it was quite agile for its size. Waving his finger with the ring, he thought that everything was useless. The fiery arrow, having changed its trajectory, approached the monster. The explosion sprayed acid in different directions. Among the torn slime body was a red sphere. The main character immediately appeared above the regenerating monster. The flames engulfed his staff and he said that this was the end. The monster raised his huge hand. The palm quickly descended over El Palm. Squinting, he turned around. The ring on his hand lit up with a bright light. The dagger with the rope stabbed into the ground, shrouded in blue energy. The monster hit the ground. The main character, having landed, slipped on the rocky soil, swinging his fire staff. He used a fire arrow. A fiery arrow cut through the air. The monster covered his face with a huge hand. El Palm grinned widely. Moments before colliding with the hand, the fiery arrow changed its trajectory, passing from below in an arc. Then it hit the monster's face with an explosion. The core, surrounded by flames, was covered in cracks. The monster's body began to swell greatly. Its eyes widened in bewilderment. An explosion thundered, tearing the creature into pieces. A stream of acid poured out. Acid chased the fleeing protagonist. El Palm grabbed a dagger with a rope in his hand. He threw the dagger shrouded in blue energy forward. After making several turns, the rope twisted around the tree branch. The main character jumped onto a branch and a stream of yellow acid passed under him. He looked down intently. The flow of acid demolished trees in its path. After some time, the acid dissolved with a hiss, burning through the soil and trees. El Palm stepped onto the ground. He began to walk among the smoke. Noticing something, he frowned. Something glowed red, and the main character used telekinesis by raising his palm. A red sphere burst out of the ground. It appeared in the palm of the protagonist. The sphere then began to glow with a bright light. Red energy surrounded it. A sound sounded and he was surrounded by what looked like a red barrier. El Palm was sitting at a table across from Abbas in the guild building. Abbas looked at him silently with a cigar in his teeth. Frowning his eyebrows, he said that he can do more than just talk. He asked about the fact that he was alone again and without the items that he undertook to return. The main character said that the team he was assigned to consisted of absolute beginners who tried to kill him in order to take his item. Closing his eyes, he said that it seemed like they had encountered a boss monster and had died running away from it. Abbas asked if he had seen it. El Palm replied that it was golden slime. Exclaimed in amazement, Abbas said about all the items left over from past adventures. The main character said that they were corroded by acid. Gritting his teeth, Abbas thought that he couldn't believe that the guild had lost all the items they had been lent, and it was a huge loss. Looking at the main character, he thought that him returning was another problem. Several universal rules apply to all gates. Firstly, each gate has its own limit on the number of people entering. It is marked on the trunk in front of the entrance. When the limit is reached, the gate is deactivated until everyone who enters dies. Secondly, there is a limit on which adventurers can enter a gate of a certain color. The gate difficulty ranges from red to purple, and if the adventurer's rank exceeds the limit, he will not be able to enter the gate. Third, adventurers are given only one chance to clear the gate. This is the main difficulty associated with their capture. As soon as someone leaves the gate alive, it immediately disappears, and no one else can enter there. Another opportunity is given only if all team members died at the gate. Abbas thought that the gates and rewards had disappeared, and the golden slime was too powerful a monster for one circle adventurers. He said that meant he barely made it out of there, which explained why he didn't return any of the items, since they were all apparently destroyed. He said that whatever the reason, he failed. The main character told him not to rush to a conclusion, because he was not finished yet. Abbas looked at him in amazement. El Palm pulled the cord and removed the bracer from his left wrist. Abbas exclaimed that this could not be. The main character, showing off his wrist with a grin, said that he had absorbed the golden slime. Abbas asked in amazement about the two circles. He asked if he had absorbed the mana stone that fell from it. El Palm replied that he felt this was a great proof of his abilities to him, and now he wanted him to register him as an E-rank adventurer. Abbas said, D rank. The main character opened his mouth in amazement, hovering over him with a wide smile. Abbas said that he would register him as a D rank, and if he agreed to work exclusively for him, he would become a C rank. The main character signed the contract. Abbas thought that C rank was prohibitively high for an adventurer without a third circle. The rank of adventurers is strongly tied to the number of circles. A to B rank, honored adventurer, C to D rank, junior adventurer, E to F rank, novice adventurer. In this world, the power corresponding to the number of circles is very different. Looking at the main character, Abbas thought that this guy was clearly an exception, because not everyone can get a circle by using a mana stone. He thought that, in addition, he had an instinct of self-preservation. Smiling widely, he thought that this instinct was far superior to those he had noticed in fellow adventurers, and he earned a second circle in the blink of an eye immediately after the first. He thought that his development speed was unheard of and he needed to be hired. Abbas beamed a smile in front of the main character. Al Palm sighed and thought that everything was going better than he expected, and he probably desperately needed it. He thought that, to be honest, it would come in handy very soon. He thought about a huge red portal. The main character thought that the first conquest of the Red Gate for 100 people would soon take place. He thought that, if his memory served him right, there would be a huge event happening around this time that all the trade and adventure guilds in Lith would be interested in. Daffer will certainly pay attention to it too. Putting his pen on the table, Al Palm thought that this was not bad at all, because he was also in a hurry, and it wouldn't hurt him to speed up the execution of his plan a little. He said he wanted to ask for a favor. Abbas said he was listening. The main character raised his palm. He asked him to lend him money. Abbas thoughtfully held a cigar in his hand. Without changing his face, he wondered if he was serious when he said this. While some claim that the gate's appearance spawned an era of adventure, it is actually a trap set by a dark magician. Many adventurers died in the gates, slowly but surely robbing the world of Maple of its potential. And then the day of the apocalypse came. A huge number of monsters, as if waiting for this moment, emerged from the gate, and the people were defeated. The described event will occur exactly 3 years later. The tragic fate of the Maple world that is destined to face it is already close. Abbas looked out the window, holding a cigar in his teeth. The main character walked along a street full of people. He thought that he had a long way to go, but this should be enough to begin to implement his plans. People around were talking about something of their own, and he thought that the recently found gate for 100 people was red, which means that only those with 2 circles or less could enter there. Al-Pam thought that the Gaffer Trade Guild usually hired adventurers with high ranks, and the only reason to invest in him was because they were targeting this gate. The sun was shining on the stone houses, and he thought that he finally had money, but he needed to use it wisely, and he shouldn't spend it all at once. He thought that truly useful items were too expensive, having taken a step. The main character thought about what would be the most profitable thing to spend the borrowed money on. He stood in front of a stone passage. The golden sign glittered in the sun. Al-Pam stood with his hands clenched into fists. The guy greeted him with a smile at Litha's slave market, saying that he must be an adventurer. He asked to be allowed to help him. He asked what exactly he was looking for, a decoy slave or a partner who would fight alongside him. The main character, shaking his head, said that he was looking for a certain person. He asked to be taken to him. The guy smiled in amazement and asked who exactly. Walking down the torchlit corridor, he said that there were punishment rooms where the most problematic people were sent for correctional purposes, and the one he was looking for was one of them. They stopped. The guy pointed with a puzzled look. Someone clenched their fists, bound with steel chains. The guy swallowed his saliva nervously. Turning around, he asked if he was sure. The main character said that he knows. Looking at the chained guy standing behind bars, he said that he was looking for him. The big guy frowned furiously. The death of one person accelerated the destruction of the world of Maple in the protagonist's past life. Erin, the halberd heroine with long white hair, was killed. The culprit turned out to be none other than her only student, hero killer Debo. This incident marked the beginning of the end. Debo asked about what he was looking for. He spat and told him to leave because they had never met before. The seller, sweating nervously, apologized and said that this ignoramus still needs to be taught some manners. Debo bared his teeth, and Al-Pam thought that he would earn fame and position in a few years, but for now he was in slavery, yet daring to be insolent to the adventurer who could become his master, and the word insolent did not fully reflect his character. The seller said that he was a savage and even a barbarian. Grinning, the main character thought, not in vain. He thought how, after all, he was the most powerful person after him when the apocalypse happened, and people often compared them since they both come from the same region and have a lot in common, dating back to when they awakened your strengths and ending with how strong you have become. The torch burned with a crackling sound, and the main character thought that they had one main similarity. He asked what the price was, stretching his shoulders. Debo said that he seemed to come from a wealthy family. He asked if he was sure he could afford to buy it. Grinning widely, he said, 1 million miso. He asked if it was too much for him. Al-Pam thought that they were both desperate for money. He thought that his younger sister was suffering from the black-blooded plague, gritting his teeth in dissatisfaction. Debo told him to leave if he had no money. The main character reached into his bag. Debo opened his eyes in shock. Al-Pam waved a wad of bills. Debo exclaimed in shock that this was a real million. The seller asked if he was sure of his decision. Debo swallowed nervously. The main character said that he rejoices early, because he is not finished yet. He said that he demanded a contract for a year, a division of profits 7-3, and the transfer of all items obtained from the gate to him. The salesman thought in amazement that he was trying to hire him as a team member, not a slave. Handing over the paper, Al-Pam told him to read the terms carefully. Debo, abruptly snatched the paper from his hands, told him not to take back his words. He bit his finger and started bleeding. He pressed his bloody finger on the paper, and the main character thought that he didn't even think about anything. It seemed like he was in a hurry to take care of his little sister. He grinned, closing his eyes. He said that the contract had been signed, so they would immediately go to the gate. Smiling widely, Debo said that he had been waiting for him to say this. Al-Pam said with a cool face that he had to prove his worth. Debo said with a wild smile that he was the most dexterous person he had ever met. The sun was shining through the foliage of the trees. Debo called out to the main character, walking behind him. Looking at his red axe, he said that he liked the new weapon, but he felt more confident with the long sword. He asked if he should learn something in which he has more experience. Al-Pam turned around and said that while he was working with him, he would only use the halberd, and if he was against it, they could terminate the contract. Debo asked if they would train in this gate. Taking a look at the portal, he said that it was a red gate with one mark and a limit of 8 people. The main character said that it would do. Looking around, Debo asked what about the other team members, since he was sure he had enough money to hire them. He asked if the healer would be with them, because he was very important. Alpom stared back at him and Debo asked why he was staring at him like that. Frowning, he asked, "Is it really?" The main character told him not to worry, because they have enough people on the team to clear the gate. Debo, breathing out a sigh of relief, said that he scared him. Alpom raised a finger forward. Pointing his finger at him, he said, "You and me." Debo looked back at him in amazement. An awkward silence fell between them. Debo exclaimed in amazement and asked if this was a joke. The main character, kicking him into the portal, told him not to waste time and go. Debo fell screaming into the red portal. They appeared with a red flash in the rocky desert. Debo appeared and fell on all fours. Turning around, he angrily asked if he was crazy and what the two of them could do in a gate designed for 8. He asked ere his serious approach to business was. The main character looked at him with narrowed eyes and Debo said that he first forced him to take a weapon that he was not used to. A huge cloud of dust rose from the side. Debo exclaimed that these were stumps. Many walking tree stumps were running in their direction. Clicking his tongue, he thought that they were probably attracted by his scream, and they were known for their resistance to bladed weapons, and there were a whole lot of them here. Alpom, standing in front of him, told him to step aside. Debo confusedly told him to wait. The main character was approaching the monsters. Using a fire arrow, he made a hole through one of the stumps. Debo opened his eyes and mouth in amazement. The main character destroyed several monsters with one fiery arrow. The fire arrow constantly changed direction around them, destroying every monster in its path. The last guy fell to the ground. Alpom said it was sad that he started screaming as soon as he entered the gate. Turning around, he told him not to make such a mistake again. Debo wondered who he was. The full moon was shining over the large building. Someone said the trade guild took the bait. The girl, down on one knee, said that they were thinking through the implementation schedule, and among them were their people. The wine glittered in a glass goblet in someone's hand. The man stood with his back to her, looking out the huge window, and the girl asked if he would allow him to proceed with the plan. The man turned around and said yes. The girl bowed silently. She dissolved into thin air, turning into black energy. A man with long white hair, raising his glass, said that everything would be done according to the will of that man. Looking at the moon through the red liquid in the glass, he said that they would liberate the world of Maple. The stumps burned with a crash on the ground. Debo, holding a small bag in his hand, said that there are 27 mana stones here. The main character, without turning around, called him to go. The sun was shining brightly in the sky above them. Debo thought that he was just a crazy person, but he is an amazing person. He wondered if it was telekinesis. He thought that he had never heard of such a use of a fire arrow. Smiling stupidly, he thought that if he traveled with this guy, he would definitely earn a lot of money, because he would get 30% of the income, and this would cover the cost of treatment. Stopping, Alpom said that they were here. Several stumps appeared sitting on the ground, standing behind the rock. Debo said that there are 9 of them here. The main character said that this was the right number. Debo turned around and asked what he was talking about. Alpom looked at him with a serious expression on his face. A small stone fell to the ground, and one of the stumps opened his eyes. Debo jumped at him, swinging his axe. He cut the monster in half with one blow of his axe. The rest of the stumps, eyes wide, Debo frowned and turned around, wondering if he was crazy and how he was supposed to defeat them alone, especially with the weapon he had first picked up. As he dodged the monster's attacks, he thought that he would not have survived even with 9 lives like a cat. He shouted that he was a terrible boss. Watching his battle, the main character thought that he would have to master the halberd for a long time. Looking at it calmly, he thought that he would soon realize that this was the best type of weapon for him. Debo shouted to him to wait, but he was already far away, and he exclaimed that he was very fast. The main character's staff was engulfed in flames. He shot a fire arrow. Debo, sweating nervously, thought that this was useless and the monster could not be defeated without tactics. They needed to move away and come up with a plan. The monster waved its branches and there was an explosion. It opened its eyes wide. A fiery arrow cut his face. Debo was amazed that it worked. The main character held a staff shrouded in flames in his hand. Having shot a fiery arrow, he thought that it was moving the branches faster than he thought. An explosion thundered, and he thought that even telekinesis would not help to strike. The spell was approaching the monster, and he thought that since he had 2 circles, he could use 2 abilities at the same time. The fiery arrow cut off the monster's branch. Debo, fighting against the stumps, thought it was amazing. He thought that he hid one arrow under another. Although the monster is agile, he cannot be stopped by 2 blows in a row. Fire arrows circled around the monster, and he thought that only one person was defeating the stump, and perhaps his boss was much stronger than he imagined. Gritting his teeth, Debo mentally cursed. Several monsters were approaching El Palm from behind. Debo shouted to him about the danger from behind and thought that he had missed a couple of monsters because there were too many of them. The fiery arrow, changing its trajectory, destroyed the monsters behind the main character. Turning around, he asked Debo if he could not even cope with ordinary monsters. The monster's eyes sparkled. It raised its leg above the main character. Pushing off from the stones, El Palm jumped up in thought. Not a moment of peace, the monster swung a huge branch. The main character opened his eyes in amazement. Debo grabbed his shoulder with his hand. Throwing it aside, he cut the branch. He landed. Turning around, Debo, breathing heavily, said that he saved him, and now they are even. The main character smiled widely. The flames engulfed his staff and he said he had gotten his money's worth. He grinned and Debo suggested ending it. El Palm shot 2 fire arrows. One of the monster's branches was cut off and an explosion occurred. The monster turned around with a roar. It waved the branch towards the fiery arrow. Debo, gritting his teeth, swung his halberd. He cut off the monster's branch, and the fiery arrow, shrouded in blue energy, changed direction. It broke through 2 branches at once. The main character frowned, looking up. Debo was surrounded by 2 large branches, and El Palm thought that it was attacking from 2 sides. Using a spell, he said that he would deal with the one on the right. Debo agreed with a wide grin and swung his halberd. He cut off the monster's branch and the protagonist did the same with a fire arrow. Debo landed on the monster's body. He began to run along its trunk. He cut the branch into many small pieces. The monster hit him in the side. Blood gushed from Debo's mouth. He began to fall down screaming. A stone shrouded in blue energy rose upward. It caught the falling Debo. The monster, swinging a branch, broke the stone under him. The main character, raising his palm shrouded in blue energy, frowned and thought that it was very annoying. He lifted several large stones off the ground. Debo landed on one of the rocks. The monster swung the branch, and he, gritting his teeth, exclaimed that there was no end to this. Debo began jumping on the levitating rocks, dodging the attacks. The fiery arrow circled around the monster. It turned around and Debo swung his halberd. El Palm said it was time to call it a day. Debo struck with his halberd. His halberd pierced the monster's eye. Blood gushed out, and the monster, closing its eyes, screamed in pain. Debo accidentally let go of the halberd from his hands. He fell down with force. Standing on his feet, he frowned and looked up. Pushing off the wall, he jumped and shouted that this was not the end. The main character clenched his hand into a fist shrouded in blue energy. Blue energy enveloped the halberd. El Palm waved his hand upward. Twisting in the air, the halberd soared into the air. Debo caught the halberd with both hands. Gritting his teeth, he said it was time to get dessert. He hit the giant eye with his halberd. Blood gushed from the monster's eye. The monster threw Debo off of him. Debo landed on his feet. The monster hung over him, its mouth wide open. 2 fiery arrows flashed next to Debo. They flew into the monster's mouth. The flame enveloped the core which was covered with cracks. A strong flame enveloped the monster. Debo was breathing heavily and the protagonist praised him. El Palm stood next to him, his hand on his belt. Debo, after a short silence, praised him in response. They watched as the monster in front of them burned with huge flames. The full moon was shining above the building in the night sky. A girl with long dark hair, sitting at the table, said that it was already late and she needed to quickly eat and go to bed. Clasping her hands, she wished him bon appetit. Hearing a knock on the door, she turned around. The girl opened the door and asked who it was. She opened her eyes wide in amazement. Debo, covered in wounds, stood in front of her with a smile. She clutched her skirt with a trembling hand and Debo said that he was back. The girl frowned and tears flowed from her eyes. They hugged each other. A small house stood among the trees. The main character was holding a staff in his hands, and a bloody hand was visible on the bed in front of him. He looked down silently. On the table there was a photograph of two smiling people. Foam was flowing from the mouth of the man lying on the bed. Frowning, El Palm narrowed his eyes. Flames engulfed the staff in his hand. He walked away from the house, enveloped in flames. The light from the flames shone on him from behind. Abbas, sitting in his office, sighed and said that this was a problem. Looking at the papers, he said that it was time to send people to the 100-person gate, but he didn't know who to choose. He said that Rakan was responsible for this campaign and if it failed there would be trouble. Abbas said that this campaign is very important and will attract the attention of all the top 10 guilds, and the 100-player gate should have items of epic rank and above. He said there might even be legendary tier items. Shaking the ash off his cigar, he said it would be difficult. The three Natasha sisters of the Goldrich Merchant Union are so strong that it is difficult to believe that they have only 2 circles, and, in comparison with them, the adventurers of the second circle from Gaffer are even ashamed to be called adventurers. Abbas said that even without them, the adventurers from the 10 guilds pose a threat, because their guild is the weakest of the 10 largest. Looking at a piece of paper with a portrait of the main character, he said that he did not want to admit it. The door to his office swung open, and he asked who dared to enter here without knocking. Abbas opened his eyes in amazement. A man in rich clothes stood at the door. Abbas exclaimed that it was Rakan. Rakan asked what happened to the composition of the group. Abbas apologized. Rakan, sitting on his chair, said that he usually does not delay with such things. He asked how their friend was doing. Abbas said he still has cause for concern. Rakan sighed and said quietly that he still had doubts. Abbas said that the last time the Shev group was destroyed, and since there were no witnesses, it is not possible to determine what exactly happened there. He said that he is certainly talented, but that is not the problem. Raising his palm, Rakan will invite him to check him again, whether he is crazy or not. Abbas looked at him in amazement and Rakan told him to gather all the candidates. Printing widely, rubbing his chin, he said that this time there would be a lot of witnesses. The main character stepped onto the ground. Debo, seeing the large portal, said that there are a lot of people here this time, although this is usually how it should be. Someone approached El Palm and asked if they were the 5th team. Folding his arms across his chest, the guy with dark hair, making a displeased grimace, said that they were 2 former slaves. The main character, squinting, looked at them. Looking at the people who were looking at them with narrowed eyes, he thought that the fact that they were not welcome here was immediately clear, and the more experienced the team, the more their confidence grew that the slaves were just a nuisance. Looking at the guy's wrist, he thought that they seemed to have 1 minute's 2 laps, and they were different from the Shev team, because with such abilities they did not need bait. Abbas told everyone to get ready and they turned towards him. With a cigar in his mouth, he said that he would get straight to the point. He said that they will now conduct a test and those who demonstrate their abilities will get a special chance. The guy with dark hair asked in amazement about the chance. Abbas, spreading his arms to the sides, said that this is a chance to enter the gate for 100 people. The guy opened his mouth in shock. Abbas said this would be a special opportunity for them. Al Palm wondered if he was going to do things this way. The number 40 was shining on the portal, and Abbas suggested starting. There was a flash of red light. They came out of the portal. Looking around, the guy asked that there was also a forest here. Turning around, he asked if it was enough to just kill the boss together. The guy with glasses nodded. The guy suggested splitting up and meeting when they received the signal. Debo stood silently next to the main character, looking down. The adventurers began to walk through the forest. The guy with the glasses, Dolan, said that time is short so it needs to be spent productively. He noticed movement in the bushes, seeing a mushroom-like monster. He asked in disappointment that he was alone here. Blue energy enveloped his staff and he said that they were wasting their time. He used an electrical discharge and the blue energy hit the monster. Dolan thought it was boring. He said to collect the magic stone and move on. A cloud of dust cleared around the monster. They exclaimed in amazement that the monster was still alive. Dolan asked if magic attacks might not work on him. A gust of wind blew, blowing leaves from the trees. Dolan shouted to everyone to be careful. Many monsters surrounded them and he exclaimed that they were surrounded. Blue energy sparkled in the air. The monster fell to the ground. The guys were breathing heavily. Surrounded by dead monsters, they said they were done. The girl told Dolan that the monsters are stronger than they expected. She asked what they would do. Frowning, Dolan said that, in any case, there were too many of them for them and if this continued, their strength would quickly dry up. He said that the risk was quite high but suggested breaking the alliance and killing the boss ourselves. The main character said that this is what most of the teams would think. Breathing heavily, Debo said that this will happen because they are too proud. He asked if he was going to help since he was only talking. Alpon said there were only 3 of them and he was doing well himself. Frowning, Debo said that, anyway, they didn't have any extra time. The main character, agreeing, said that they needed to act. Debo said that they will start hunting for the boss. The main character said that they will destroy all monsters. Debo said that he himself was just talking about the boss. Alpon said that others would think so and they would engage in mass destruction of monsters. He said that killing the boss is not the only indicator of ability. Hunting small monsters also takes into account and it can be dangerous to compete with a large number of groups determined to attack the boss and it is difficult to predict the lengths they will go to hold each other off. Debo, agreeing, said it might be difficult to break through. Gritting his teeth, he thought it was annoying but he was right. The wind blew and the main character added that danger emanated from these gates. Dolan and his team walked through the forest. The girl told him to look there, pointing her finger. She said it was an escape gate. Dolan said he didn't want to look for them now. He thought they would leave a mark on the road if it happened. The guy in green clothes started laughing loudly. Dolan told him to be quiet. The guy continued to laugh. Putting his hand on his shoulder, Dolan asked if he had heard. He said it would attract monsters. Turning around, the guy continued to laugh, sweating and bleeding tears. A purple mist surrounded them and everyone around them also began to laugh. Covering his face with his hand, Dolan thought that it was poison and he needed to get out himself. He ran towards the escape gate. A huge mushroom-shaped monster with sharp teeth appeared behind him. His body released purple gas. Dolan's eyes bulged, frowning. The monster opened its mouth wide. Dolan, removing his hand from his face, began to laugh. Looking at the monster, he began to laugh loudly. A stormy river flowed among high rocks. Debo wondered if he was even going to fight today. Noticing something, he looked up. A red flash flashed in the sky, and he said that this was the signal to gather. Approaching the other adventurers, Debo said that he was a little surprised that they notified everyone when they found the main monster. The main character frowns. Looking at the people in front, he thought that there was no one team. The guy with dark hair sighed and said that everyone was here and he would begin the explanation. The girl with dark hair said that the Dolan team was still not there. The guy replied that there was no point in waiting for them because they had found the boss. He said that this monster killed Dolan and his friends. He said that the boss of this place is a crazy poisonous mushroom. The girl, shocked, asked if he was serious. Someone exclaimed that their team was not strong enough for such a fight. Someone else said that if this is true, then trying to clear the gate is useless. The girl said that they needed to look for a way out. Debo asked the main character if this mushroom is so dangerous. Elpum thought that with the current level, an encounter with a crazy poisonous mushroom would be the most dangerous for them. Debo asked if he was listening to him. The main character, rubbing his chin, thought that because of the poison in the spores that the monster releases around itself, close combat makes no sense and it would not be possible to catch it in pincers either. Debo angrily demanded not to ignore him. The main character thought that he could only be killed in ranged combat, but given the unimaginable speed of the mushroom and its strength, one cannot attack without a plan. The guy with dark hair said that, unfortunately, this mushroom stands right in front of the exit gate, and the only way to get to it is through it. Debo said that this is not a problem, because his boss can deal with him with one fire arrow. The main character told him to shut up. Debo gritted his teeth in irritation and Elpum said that without a good strategy they would all die. He said that a fire arrow couldn't even scratch it. Debo asked in amazement why. The main character said that even ordinary monsters here have tough skins, so you shouldn't even think about the boss. Sighing, the guy with dark hair said that this was nonsense and the slaves were immediately visible. The guy with the mustache, calling him Iber, said that now is not the time for this and they need a solution. Raising his hand, the main character said, 50,000 miso. Iber looked at him questioningly. Elpum said that there are 30 of them, so in the end they need to pay 1.5 million. Pointing his finger at Debo, he said that they would then act as bait. Silence fell between them. Debo, clutching his head in shock, wondered if the boss had gone completely crazy. Iber shouted to him not to interfere. He said that it seems that his slave's thinking has not yet completely weathered, but he had better not think that everything will be as he says, because in this situation the bait will not save. He said that if the useless bait died immediately, then it would be all over for them, and in the high-level gate, the slaves would only be in the way. Pointing his finger at them, Iber asked who they were to push such ideas. He said that from what he heard, the fool next to him hadn't even woken up yet. He asked what a person with a second circle and a slave could do. Debo, baring his teeth angrily, thought that he was beginning to anger him. He thought that he was always looking for a fight, and he didn't even think about becoming bait. The main character asked what he was offering and if he had a better option. Iber couldn't answer him and Elpum said that men know, otherwise he wouldn't have collected them here. Closing his eyes, he added that their team had one person with the second circle and one with the first. Debo looked at his wrist in shock, on which there was a glowing circle. He asked when it appeared, laughing. He exclaimed that he had talent. The main character said that they themselves only have a couple of people with a second circle. Iber clenched his teeth. A girl with dark hair stopped him. Placing her hand on her chest, she said that she would pay if he became bait, although now she did not have hundreds of thousands between them. The main character said that she would pay when they left here, and if they could not escape, they would simply sacrifice themselves. He opened his eyes and looked at them. He said that his condition is the consent of absolutely everyone. He told them to decide. The escape gate was surrounded by purple mist. A monster nearby was devouring the corpses. Feeling a strong gust of wind, it turned around. The fiery arrow was rapidly approaching him. The fire hit the monster's head. A cloud of smoke appeared above the ground. The main character told Debo to run away as soon as he discovered them. Debo asked why he needed all this. The monster's eyes flashed red. He quickly rushed to attack. The main character and Debo began to run away. Debo asked why he was so fast. The monster chased after them, its mouth open, studded with huge sharp teeth. The girl shouted that now they must activate the gate before the bait is killed. The guy touched the stone column. Blue energy flashed between the two stone pillars. The blue portal appeared and they ran inside. The monster quickly ran after the main character and Debo. Debo frowned and opened his eyes wide. Many monsters jumped in front to attack, and he asked if they were serious. Yellow energy enveloped his halberd and he asked if they thought he would be so easy. Swinging his halberd, he shouted at them to get out of the way. Using a slashing blast, Debo destroyed the monsters around him. The mushroom monster opened its mouth wide behind him. Elpum fired a fire arrow and the monster was thrown aside. The monster growled, baring its teeth. The main character shot a fiery arrow again. The monster dodged and the arrow flew past. Elpum waved his hand, shrouded in blue energy. The fire arrow changed its trajectory. The monster jumped into the attack, and a fiery arrow flew into his back. A fiery arrow flew around the monster. The mushroom monster was approaching, and Debo shouted in fear that it was catching up with it. The main character saw a cliff in front of him. They jumped off a cliff. The monster waved his huge hand. Debo called out to the monster. He gave him the middle finger with a grin. The main character's staff was shrouded in flames. He frowned in concentration. An explosion occurred on the rock, and they continued to fall down. They fell into the river with a splash. The wind carried the leaves over the river with a rapid current. Debo, leaning his hands on the ground, swore and said that they almost died there. They stood on the bank of the river. Breathing heavily, he asked what he was doing. Wringing out his clothes, the main character said that he had heard himself that this was the main monster, and in order to kill it, you need to prepare. Debo looked at him in amazement. Smiling awkwardly, he asked if he said it as if they were going to hunt him, or if he misunderstood him. Alpum said that everything is correct. Debo asked in amazement if he was kidding. The main character asked why he was screaming, and didn't they come here to hunt monsters? Debo said he didn't know the mushroom was so dangerous at the time. He asked if he knew anything about a tactical retreat. Alpum replied that if they left the gate, they would not be able to return here. Debo said irritably that he knew that. Gritting his teeth, he wondered if the fact that they were no longer pranking meant it was time for them to leave, and how Alpum was even going to win if his arrows were useless. He wondered if this was a strange way of committing suicide. The main character, closing his eyes, said that the situation had changed, because their competitors had left, and in addition to this, they had earned money. He asked if this was not wonderful. Looking at him, he asked if he was wrong and if he wanted to terminate their contract. Debo opened his mouth. Scratching his head, he said that wasn't what he meant. He asked about how they needed to earn more. Smiling, Alpum said yes. Debo asked him to explain to him how they would kill this mushroom if any attacks were useless. He said that to fight him would mean dooming yourself to death. He asked if there was really a way to win. The main character looked back at him silently. The portal flashed with a bright flash. Habuz, noticing the people, asked in amazement that they were already leaving. He asked if that was too fast for a 40-person gate. He asked the girl what was going on with the hunt, because not everyone came out. The girl said the hunt was a failure. Breathing heavily, she said, Dolan's team was killed, and Alpum and his partner were still inside, and they were able to escape only because they became bait. She said that they would never have defeated the boss on their own. Habuz opened his mouth in amazement. Frowning gloomily, he asked, what? He asked if they just ran away. The girl said that the boss was a poisonous crazy mushroom, known for its cruelty. She asked what they could do. Habuz put out his cigar with his boot. Turning around, he said they were leaving. The girl asked him to wait. She said that Alpum is there and the gate is still active, which means he is alive.
This concludes the latest chapter.
Abyss said that this would not last long, because she herself said that there was a poisonous crazy mushroom there. As he left, he told them to wait for them if they wanted, but he had things to do. Frowning, he thought that they were useless idiots and the situation was not encouraging. Walking among the trees, he thought that a person with a second circle would never be able to kill a mushroom, so their outcome was a foregone conclusion, but he did not need those who could only run away. The mushroom monster stood among the trees, surrounded by purple spores. The main character stood on the edge of a cliff, pulling a bowstring with a fiery arrow. Abyss thought that he wanted someone who could do the impossible. Flames floated in the air around El Palm and he said they were starting the hunt. He shot a fire arrow. The arrow quickly fell down the cliff. Compared to other bosses, this one is very fast and strong. The matter is complicated by the fact that poisonous fumes emanate from it, and you just have to keep your distance and put pressure. The main character thought that with the current level of the fire arrow, this was problematic. However, if you use telekinesis and rotate the arrow at high speed, the penetrating power will increase. Essentially, an arrow turns into a bullet, and in the world of Maple, only El Palm can use this method, which allows you to accomplish the impossible. This method is called revolver. A spinning fire arrow was approaching the monster. The monster raised its head, opening its mouth. A fiery arrow hit him in the body, and he lost his balance. The monster screamed, opening its bloody mouth. The fiery arrow, spinning, drilled into his body. Having pierced the monster, the fiery arrow flew out from the other side. The wind blew the main character's hair. A fiery arrow pierced through the trees behind the monster. Palm thought that he wanted to punch the head and the core at once, but he missed a little. He said it made him angry. The monster, opening its mouth, turned in his direction. He began to run towards the rock on which there was a flash. The fiery arrow hit the monster. The main character thought that using a revolver did not allow him to easily adjust the direction of the arrow, and there was also a problem with the reload time of the skill. A spinning fire arrow was coming down, and he thought that he needed to finish off the monster before it recovered. Debo stood behind a tree and a fire arrow struck behind the monster. The monster screamed loudly. The main character shouted, "Now!" Debo grabbed the rope with his hand. Pulling the rope, he screamed. The rope, sliding between the trees, became taut. The monster tripped over the rope and fell. He fell into the water with a splash. He rose from the mud. The main character stood on a rock above a monster standing in the water. He looked down. The monster raised its head questioningly. A halberd shrouded in yellow energy flashed behind him. The tip of the halberd pierced the monster's head. Debo stood nearby in the water. He raised his halberd, holding the handle tightly in his hand. The monster, covered in mud, looked in his direction. Beckoning him with his finger, Debo offered to dance a bloody tango. Debo stood opposite the monster under the rock, on top of which stood Palm. The main character wondered if this would be enough. The point of their plan is to lure him into the swamp, and the golden rule of hunting is to deprive the prey of its strengths. Thus, he will lose his main weapon. The mushroom monster was trying to emit spores through the mud. Debo asked if the holes in his head were clogged and now nothing was working. Waving his halberd, he shouted that it was wonderful. He let go of the halberd's handle. He grabbed the rope tied to the halberd, which struck the monster with a bright yellow flash. The halberd stuck into the monster's hand. Debo began to throw a lot of fast punches, leaving a yellow trail in the air. The monster waved his huge hand. He fell into the swamp. The main character thought that he drove him into the swamp not only so that the holes would become clogged. He thought that this was the most disgusting place for a fleet-footed enemy. The monster found that he could not move his leg. Alpon used a revolver. A spinning fire arrow hit the monster, spinning. It drilled into the monster's body. There was a big splash in the swamp. Debo asked if he died. The silhouette of a monster was visible among the cloud of smoke, and he said that it was too tenacious. The main character shouted to him to attack his core, which is located in his head. Throwing his halberd forward, Debo shouted what he knew. The halberd, shrouded in yellow energy, was approaching the monster's head. The monster caught the halberd with his hand. Debo opened his eyes in amazement. The monster pulled the rope towards itself, pulling him towards it. The main character's hand lit up with a blue light. A huge log rose into the air. It hit the monster with force. The monster pushed the log away with his hand. Holding onto a branch on a log, Debo jumped down. He kicked the monster in the head. Then he jumped onto a tree lying in the swamp. He took the hilt of the halberd in his hand. Debo jumped from the tree. He began to run around the monster. The main character raised his palm, shrouded in blue energy. Swamp water rose up around the monster. The water hit the monster, which covered itself with its hand. The silhouette of a man was visible in the water. The monster looked forward questioningly. He extended his hand forward. The monster discovered that there was no one behind the water. Debo behind him swung his halberd, shrouded in yellow energy. He furrowed his brows. Swinging his halberd, he cut off the monster's head. The head fell into the swamp water. The headless body of the monster stood motionless. Debo turned to face the rock, breathing heavily. He gave a thumbs up. The main character smiled slightly. He opened his eyes wide, noticing something. The headless monster behind Debo swung his arm. With a wave of his hand, he cut the rope tied to the halberd. The halberd flew to the side and fell into the water. The monster, spreading its arms to the sides, screamed loudly. Palm, shooting a fiery arrow, wondered why he was still alive, because his head was torn off. The fiery arrow hit the swamp with force, splashing water. Smoke hovered over the swamp. The monster moved quickly, jumping from side to side. Waving his hand, shrouded in blue energy, the protagonist thought that there was something else. He raised the log on which the monster stood over the swamp. The monster jumped, pushing off from the log. He jumped towards the cliff. The monster grabbed the rock with its hands. He began to climb, and the main character thought that he only had one fire arrow left. There was no time to recover and there was no point in shooting at random. Gritting his teeth, Debo swore, raising his halberd. He furiously shouted that he was very angry. Using a slashing explosion, he threw his halberd forward. The yellow light was approaching the monster. The halberd, striking in the middle, deprived the monster of the lower half of its body. The monster's feet fell into the water. Debo grinned happily. The monster continued to climb the rock. The main character started using a fire arrow and Debo shouted that it was dangerous. A fiery arrow flew past the monster. A small black face stared back at him from inside the monster's body. It smiled noisily, glowing red. The main character asked if this was his real head. Pointing the gun at the monster, he thanked him for the tip. Debo thought in amazement that the previous attack was a bluff. The main character's staff was engulfed in flames. Using his revolver, he shot a spinning fire arrow at the monster, causing it to fall down. A fiery arrow drilled into the small black head. Then it finally pierced right through him. The monster fell to the ground with a crash. There was a huge purple explosion. Debo exclaimed, "It's being a pain till the end." Shrouded in blue energy, it grabbed him, lifting him into the air. Finding himself behind the main character, he said that he thought that he would die. Under the rock, a purple mist floated on the ground. Debo asked if this was the end. El Palm, closing his eyes, said yes. Opening his eyes, he praised him for his good job. He said what would happen as soon as the poison stopped coming out of the mana stone. But at that moment something flashed in front of him. The main character turned his head in amazement. The monster's body, surrounded by purple smoke, floated in the air. The red core, covered with cracks, glowed brightly. They watched the red flash as the purple gas approached them. Debo clenched his teeth and laughed. Raken, laughing, asked Abbas that he just left them there. Still laughing, he said that his temperament had not changed at all. Abbas apologized and said that the matter should be entrusted to Cygna's knights. There was a knock on the door and he said irritably that he had already said he was busy. Opening the door, the main character said that he was coming in. Abbas looked in amazement towards the entrance. El Palm, covered in dirt and bruises, said he was back. Raken smiled widely. He said with a devilish smile that this was very interesting. He asked Abbas what he would say now and whether he had risen from the dead. With his face resting on his hand, Raken greeted El Palm and said his name was Raken. He said that he had heard about his extraordinary survival skills. He said that he can say that people like him are needed in Gaffer now. The main character, closing his eyes, thanked him. Raken grinned and said that he knows the rules of politeness. He said he would only ask one thing. Grinning widely, he asked if he could demonstrate his abilities in a 100-person gate. El Palm looked at him, closing his eyes. He said it would be difficult. Raken stopped smiling and looked at him. Abbas angrily asked what he was allowing himself to do. He asked if he thought that he made him an adventurer so that he would choose his job according to his mood. The main character was silent and he shouted that he still owed them. Smirking, Raken asked about what he said was difficult, but not impossible. He said that he doesn't like it when people avoid answering, so he will ask differently. He asked what he wanted. El Palm opened his eyes. Fear flowed from Debo's mouth. Sitting next to the main character at the bar, he asked about 5 million miso per person. He exclaimed that the two of them already had 10 million, and that was too much. The wet protagonist looked at him displeased, and Debo apologized, slamming his fist on the table. He asked if he was being greedy, since the first offer is always rejected in most cases. Wiping his face with a handkerchief, El Palm said that this did not concern him, and they would decide. Sighing, Debo said that he was too relaxed due to success. At this rate Abbas would definitely skin them. Someone said they were lucky and he turned around. Iber said with hostility on his face that it makes him deathly angry when he is compared to someone like them. Debo angrily asked if he wanted to thank him for saving him. He told him, if not, to take off the emblem and go outside together. Iber and the girl next to him bowed and apologized. Iber said that they were biased and doubted their abilities as adventurers. They are ashamed of such assessment of strangers, and they sincerely apologize. Handing them a bag, he said that this was the promised payment from everyone, 1.5 million, and each of the detachment added a little in it as gratitude. Debo thanked him, confused, and Iber said there was no need. The main character said that they would only take 1.5 million. Closing his eyes, he said that they would do as they agreed and they could keep the gratitude for themselves. Opening his eyes, he said that there was no point in pretending. The girl and Iber looked at him in amazement. Debo clicked his tongue and said that he would count the money. Calling the guy a pirate, the main character asked if his name was Iber and what about him. He asked if he could do the job he was paid for. Iber looked at him in amazement. Abbas shouted loudly that this was impossible. He said that 10 million meso was the amount paid to adventurers of the third or fourth circle, and although he might be the best candidate, it would be a bad example if he accepted his terms. There was a book on a stack of papers on the table, and he said that perhaps he was just checking the situation, and it would be better to call him again to discuss payment again. Rakan asked if he really thought so. He said that it would not be strange if he asked for the same amount again. Abbas looked at him in amazement. Rakan handed him a piece of paper and told him to read it. Abbas read the piece of paper and Rakan said that they would only send the Alpum team to represent the Gaffer Trade Guild this time. Abbas thought that just 2 people could do it. He looked at the piece of paper in shock. He asked if it was real. Rakan said that if this were not true, he would be in big trouble, because he paid a lot of money for this information. He said, Dark Lord Jin. Abbas, gritting his teeth, thought, if this is true. Taking a pen from the table, Rakan told him not to be mistaken. He said with a serious expression that the war had already begun. The sun was shining brightly in the daytime sky. Many people stood around the giant red portal. The guys were talking enthusiastically, sitting around the fire. Debo exclaimed that he did not expect them to actually accept these terms. One of the guys turned around in amazement. The main character told him not to get excited and foci. Debo told him not to worry because he was now an experienced adventurer too. The gold badge glittered on the main character's cloak. The guy with dark hair looked at him. The guy with blonde hair frowned at them, wiping his dagger. Debo sarcastically said that the atmosphere here is incredible. Someone said that it looked like someone new had come to them. A man with long blonde hair asked if they were the guys from the Gaffer Trade Guild. He said that he was an E-class adventurer from the Genie's Trade Guild, Sholden. The protagonist replied that he was a C-class adventurer, L. Palm. Sholden exclaimed in surprise that he thought only first and second circle adventurers could enter the gate due to restrictions. L. Palm was silent, frowning and closing his eyes. Someone behind him asked if he could move. A girl with long blonde hair and a ponytail said she had a thing for this man. Sholden, clicking his tongue in displeasure, asked what was wrong with these guys. He said he wasted his time. The main character calmly looked forward. He remembered asking why he needed to do this. Abbas told him to just do what he was told and not ask so many questions. He said that their trade guild, Gaffer, would work together with the Cygna's Night Order in this gate. They follow the teachings of the Empress Cygnas, the strongest group, the Cygna's Night Order. The one called the Symbol of Power has shown interest in this gate. Abbas said, quota for the gate was already taken up by other Merchant Union adventurers, so they decided to work with them. He said even if it was their trainee knights, the success rate would be higher. Closing his eyes, he said that although they may have selfish reasons for going to this gate, the offer they made to them was not that bad, so they would work together. The main character nodded and said that simply cooperation is not difficult. Abbas said he doesn't think it will be that simple. Looking to the side, he said, something about them feels off. The girl said that her name is Kiri, and she is the leading trainees of the Cygna's Night Order. She said she hoped they didn't think they were of the same status just because they exchanged a few words. She said that she didn't want any unnecessary trouble, so they could just listen to her orders and quietly obey. Debo asked irritably what kind of attitude this was. Kiri, frowning, asked if they too were the only ones sent from the Gaffer Trade Guild. Alpum said it looks like it. Sighing, Kiri asked if Gaffer had finally given up. Someone stepped forward. Crocus party from Dig Merchant Union appeared nearby, then Kibble's party from Merdia Merchant Union appeared. Debo thought that they were elites from the trade guilds and the atmosphere suddenly changed. Kiri turned in someone's direction. 3 women with red hair appeared, the 3 Natasha sisters from Goldrich Merchant Union. The badge glittered on their chest. Kiri said displeasedly that they were acting cocky. The man with the red beard said that everyone is here. He said that they were chosen to protect this raid and his name is Lonko. He said they were here to provide support as they made their way out of the gate, raising his palm. He said that while he was sure they had heard everything from their trade guilds, he would explain again as a reminder. Lonko said that the legendary item that would come out of this gate would not belong to them even if they obtained it. He said that the rights to the items would belong to their trade guilds and they would be paid according to the terms they agreed to. Laughing, he added that they could at least be happy that they could keep the mana stones. The main character narrowed his eyes. Lonko said with a smirk, if they were caught trying to take the item for themselves, they would have to fight their adventurer team. He raised his hand with 5 circles on his wrist. Debo thought in amazement that he had 5 laps. Looking at them in amazement, he wondered if they all really had 5 circles. Lonko said that the announcements were over and now everyone could enter the gate. He returned around and said to follow her. Frowning her brows, she said, they will be the ones to succeed. Debo irritably asked what was wrong with her and would they really have to work together with a person like her. Frowning, Elpom finally thought. He thought that all his previous efforts were for the sake of this gate. This is a gate that he could not experience even in his past life, but it should succeed. They started walking towards the portal and he thought that it would all start here. Debo said that he would not help them even if they came running in tears. Report from the first 100-man gate of the Red class. Summary report. Genius Merchant Union. Merdia Merchant Union. Dig Merchant Union. Sky Merchant Union. El Nido Merchant Union. Goldrich Merchant Union. Wiped out. Results. Raid failed. There was a flash of red light. People appeared in the field along with a flash of red light. The guy with blonde hair ordered to follow him. Debo asked why the grass is so tall. Kiri asked if he thought they came here to admire. She told them to keep up and hurry up. Puffing with anger, he asked the protagonist if they would really accept such treatment. Turning around, he saw the main character crouched on the ground. Debo asked what he was doing. Large hooves hit the ground with force. The guy turned around and said that he heard something. A crowd of monsters that looked like pigs ran across the field, and they exclaimed that these were ribbon pigs. They exclaimed that there must be more than 1,000 of them here. Kiri shouted and asked what they were doing. She ordered spread out and shouted that there were still teams that had not yet gone inside. People turned around and she asked, wasn't it an unstated rule to not draw danger to the gate's entrance? Someone called El Nido Merchant Union. The fat guy said no and they would go the other way. They split in 2 different directions. The pigs squealed and chased the people. Kiri said that they will bait them like this to a place with more obstacles and hunt them there. The guy told her there was a problem. He said that people from the Gaffer Trade Guild had disappeared somewhere. Kiri exclaimed in amazement. Standing among the ears of corn, Debo said that it was refreshing. He said with a smile that now the lights can relax. He asked how he knew that ribbon pigs would come stampeding. El Palm said that, according to his experience, there are many herds of beasts that travel across the plains in this way. Ribbon pig. With an average body length of 2 meters, it's a monster that has a violent personality. They usually act in groups that consist of hundreds to sometimes even thousands of them. The main character thought that although they are difficult to deal with, killing them is possible, and the same should be true for other people from the trade guilds. He thought they would most likely try to avoid a fight because they didn't want to waste their energy so early. He thought that no one knows what monsters they will encounter in these gates, and everything will definitely not end with simple ribbon pigs. Remembering the torn flags, El Palm thought, before his return, the raid for the Sleepywood 100-man gate resulted in a failure, with all the adventurers dying. Turning around, Debo asked with a grin what he was thinking so hard about. He tripped over a stretched rope. He turned his head sharply. Suddenly, a structure with wooden stakes fell, and the main character saved Debo. Debo asked what it was. He asked in amazement that it was a trap. Turning pale, he asked who could do something like that. The guy cut the rope with a sword. A wooden stake rushed towards him from behind. The man swung his sword. He cut the wooden stake in half. Straightening up, he said that it was childish. The guy said he was done clearing things up here and this should be the last one. The guy with gray hair told the bald man, calling him Babble, not to relax. There was a white mask on his face. Crocus said that although they set up a few small traps, they are dangerous enough to kill on sight, and they also copied the way humans hunt. He said that from this one can easily understand that these are not ordinary monsters. He said that if monsters are so intelligent, they must be Hobbs. He said that they are much more difficult to deal with and are equivalent to the boss in the Red Gate. Closing his eyes, Crocus said that they now have an idea of what to expect, and the difficulty of this gate is indeed high. He said that everyone would have died without knowing anything if there weren't adventurers of his level nearby. Turning around, he told the others to follow him because they had to take advantage of this situation. Turning around questioningly, he said to make sure not to make anything behind. The bald man's head was on the ground before Crocus could turn around. The heads of the others were also immediately cut off. The guy with blonde hair cut off his head with one swing of his blade. He asked who it was. The guy told him with a grin that he was acting like he knew everything. The guy said they used ribbon pigs to distract people entering the gate. Sitting on a rock, he said that he didn't know whose idea it was, but it worked great for them, and this was such a good opportunity that he should start working. The guy with gray hair said wearily that this was very troublesome. Rising to his feet, he said that since they had little time, nothing could be done. He asked if they would start. 3 Natasha sisters stood silently. One of them waved her hand. The guy, looking in different directions, said that there was no point in trying to move, and this was such magic, at least for the next 30 minutes. One of the sisters asked why he was doing something like that. The guy exclaimed that she was incredible, because he did not expect that she would be able to speak under the influence of his magic. Firing his staff, he said that since she looked dangerous, he would just get rid of her now. One of the sisters closed her eyes, and tears began to flow from the eyes of the other. Rubbing his chin, the man said that this was a really difficult question. He asked, indeed, why he was doing this. He suddenly opened his eyes. Holding up the flame-covered staff, the man asked if it wouldn't be easier to understand if he said it that way. He said with a crazy smile, everything is for Sir Black Magician. He used a fire arrow and the girl opened her eyes wide with red eyelashes. The girl was torn to shreds by a fiery arrow. Their bloody corpses fell to the ground. There was a red flash behind the tall grass, and the man sighed and said there was no end to this. Closing his eyes, he sadly said that he really wanted to laze around. He remembered how he stood on his knee behind the back of a man with white hair. The man said that they had been waiting quietly for a long time just for this moment, hiding from them, growing during that time, and spreading their power. Frowning, he said that the time had finally come to harvest the fruits of their labors. William, after a short silence, said that he would not let him down. A feather shrouded in orange energy appeared above the man's palm and he told him to take it. He said it was a gift that the man gave him. He said he wouldn't accept failure. Wearing a feather around his neck, William thought that he would not be able to do it carelessly after this. Tapping his staff on the ground, he said that nothing could be done. Walking among the tall grass, he asked whether he should get serious. The wooden fortress stood under the evening sky. The goblin, breathing heavily, screamed and opened his mouth wide. Many goblins were working or walking with weapons around the fortress. Debo peeked out from behind a tree, standing next to the main character. He thought in shock what it was. He asked in a whisper if he wanted to say that each of them is a boss monster. The main character said that he had already explained to him that there was only one boss among them. He said that they have high endurance in addition to their innate strength, so fighting even one would be risky. He said that on top of that, It looked like they had collected items from the dead adventurers, so it would be even more difficult to deal with them. He said that some of them can use skills using items. Debo opened his mouth in shock. He asked if it wasn't just an army of adventurers and the two of them would go against them. El Palm praised him for his catches on quickness. Debo asked what he was talking about, because he was trying to say that it would be impossible for the two of them. He said that they need to reunite with Kiki or Kiri, whatever her name is. Rubbing his chin, the main character asked why and if he also wanted to work separately from them. Debo said that it was because he didn't know anything about these monsters and it would be impossible for the two of them. Monsters walked among the trees. The wind blew and one of them raised his head up. Turning around, he saw someone quickly approaching him. Debo swung his halberd and the monster quickly ducked. Debo exclaimed in annoyance that he was doing this on purpose because he didn't mean that he wanted to do it alone. The monster turned around and waved its fist. Debo slammed the hilt of his halberd onto the ground. He did a somersault and jumped over the monster. As he landed, he bent his knees and clenched his teeth. The monster swung its arms several times and Debo dodged it, jumping to the side at the last moment. Hitting him on the head with the hilt of the halberd, he said that he was too loud. Debo hit him hard with the tip of his halberd. The monster screamed and fell to the ground. Debo raised his halberd, shrouded in yellow energy. Jumping into the attack, swinging his halberd, he shouted that it was all over. He struck with his halberd, but the monster jumped to the side. Rising to his feet, the monster took a fighting stance. He punched Debo hard. He was thrown by the force of the blow into a tree. Gritting his teeth, he asked why he couldn't just die. The monster swung his fist angrily. He cut the tree in half with his fist and Debo ducked and dodged. He pushed off the ground. Leaping forward, he cut off the monster's hand. The monster grabbed his head with his hand. He slammed Debo's face into the ground. Debo raised his halberd, holding it with both hands. He clamped the monster's hand with the hilt of his halberd. The monster let him go and Debo jumped to the side. Pushing off the ground, he jumped forward. With a shout, he swung the halberd shrouded in yellow energy. The monster swung its fist with a scream. The wind blew leaves over the forest. The bloody body of the monster lay on the ground. Debo, stretching his arms, said he thought he would intervene to help him. The main character said that it looked like he could handle it on his own, and because of this, he now knows that it is possible to defeat them. Debo turned around and annoyedly replied that he now doubts this mission even more. Stopping, he opened his eyes in amazement. The ground was littered with bloody corpses, and he asked what they were. Looking at the guy's severed head, he shouted that they were all from Singa's knights. He asked what happened here. Someone clenched his teeth heavily. Debo attracted the protagonist's attention to him. A guy with blonde hair, gritting his teeth, leaning his back against a tree, pressed his hand on the wound. The main character asked what happened here and if the hob attacked them. Breathing heavily, the guy said that it was nothing like that. He said it was trolling. Looking out the window, Abyss exhaled tobacco smoke. He said it doesn't make sense. Trolling, some people enter these unknown gates that others cannot. Their sole purpose is to collect information and attack the other adventurers. Since the gate would disappear after their escape, all the evidence of their wrongdoings would disappear along with it. However, this time it's pretty much a fight without a winner, since they would have to clear this difficult gate while having wasted energy and minimal manpower. Even if they were to somehow clear it and bring out a unique item, they wouldn't be able to escape the suspicions of those who are outside. Abyss thought, are they after all the elites of the Merchant Union? He thought that there was no point in this, and even if this was their goal, if rumors got out, they would have to engage in a war with all the other merchant guilds, and such a dangerous risk was not something that the Merchant Guild would participate in. Guild, he wondered if that meant there was some greater meaning to it. Debo asked, really? El Palm said yes. Remembering Kiri, he said that he didn't see her. The surviving guy cursed and hit the ground with his fist. He said that it was his fault and he did not expect that there was a traitor among them. He asked why Kiri would do such a thing. The main character said that he doesn't understand. He asked why she, being part of the Cygnus Knights, was trolling. There were headless corpses around them and the guy said that he didn't understand either and it was hard for him to process it. He said that, however, When he thought about it, the orders she gave at the entrance to the gate were part of her plan. Closing his eyes, from which tears were flowing, he said that before ending here, she said it herself. He said that she was a follower of the Black Magician. Debo exclaimed about Black Magician. Black Magician, 800 years ago, he who was a transcendent, threatened the Maple World with his many followers. To stop him, the 6 heroes took charge and the fight was fully turned around against the Black Magician and his forces when he and the 6 heroes were sealed. With the follower army in chaos, the allied forces started to push back, clearing out all the followers of the Black Magician. Debo thought that everyone in the Maple World knew about this. He said it couldn't be. Helpom said that now is not the time to worry about monsters and they need to find her. He asked the guy if he would go with them. He said that he must prepare for battle when they meet her. The guy, frowning, said that this is exactly what he wanted. Here he pushed off the ground. She ran, gritting her teeth, among the tall grass. Noticing something, she furrowed her brows. She stopped and William said that he was waiting for her. A guy in a black hood stood next to him, laughing. He said that she seemed to have figured out the ribbon pigs. He said that they were able to follow through with their plan because they shared everything. And now they can finish slowly. He asked if she liked the gift they sent. Fury remained silent. Drawing her sword, she asked who they were. Debo said that they could go slower if it was too much for him, since the boss had gone ahead anyway. The guy thanked him and said he was fine. Debo, helping him walk, told him not to worry because his boss is great at looking for things and he will surely find it soon. In the guy's hand was a dagger shrouded in purple energy and he said that it was good. The sun was shining over the field. The guy jumped into the attack. He and Kiri clashed their blades in a mutual attack. William asked if this was expected of the training captain of the Cygnus Knights. They continued trading blows and he said he wondered how long she could keep this up. Kiri stomped on the ground with force. A yellow magic circle appeared behind her. She used Rising Sun and her sword began to glow. A guy with long dark hair waved his blade and shouted at her to stop pretending. After blocking his attack, Kiri quickly changed her position and attacked with her sword. The guy shouted to her to wait. Using Solar Slash, Kiri cut him into pieces, leaving yellow energy in the air. She was breathing heavily, frowning. She told them to name their target unless they wanted to die here. William, frowning, asked what they were doing. He told them to hurry up and kill her. 3 guys jumped at Kiri and shouted at her to die, raising their weapons. Something flashed among the grass. Someone cut the attackers into pieces. William opened his mouth in shock. The yellow shine disappeared from Kiri's eyes and she looked at him. Debo stood with his back to her, turning around. Some time ago, Debo told the guy not to worry because his boss was good at finding things and he would surely find her soon. The guy, holding a blade in his hand, said that this was good. Grabbing Debo by the neck and swinging his dagger, he said with a crazy smile to say hi to Kiri when he met her. A fiery arrow cut off the guy's hand and he turned around in amazement. The guy fell to the ground and Debo exclaimed in amazement. The main character was standing nearby and the guy screamed about his hand. Debo turned and asked what was going on. Alpum said everything was as he expected. He said he was a terrible actor. The light shone on the guy's face. The main character, holding a flaming staff in his hands, said that he does not have the habit of trusting people. William said it was strange. With a dissatisfied face, he said that he did not expect an uninvited guest to appear. A girl with long blonde hair said he was from the Gaffer Trade Guild. William said that it seems that the coward who can't even take his own life has failed. He said that he gave him a chance to justify himself after he lost to Kiri. He asked if he had made a mistake. Kiri furrowed her eyebrows and William said it was annoying and the two of them looked strong. The people behind him were preparing for battle and he said with a crazy smile, they'll have to have their elites take action. Kiri shouted to be careful. Debo said that they know. Smirking, he said that they were perverts. William, pointing his staff forward, ordered to finish this quickly. His subordinates rushed to the attack. Debo asked Kiri that she should cope with at least one of them. He said he would take over the rest. Kiri told him not to relax. The guy used Savage Blow and jumped forward, surrounded by red energy. Debo swung his halberd and shouldered, ducking, cursed. Debo shouted with a grin that it wasn't even worth mentioning. The girl used piercing. A fiery arrow flew next to Debo. The girl with the crossbow clicked her tongue in displeasure. Debo cursed and the guy with the sword jumped behind him. Debo turned around, frowning. The guy used upper charge and hit him on the shoulder. Debo swayed slightly and the guy asked if it was too shallow. Swinging his sword, he smiled and told him not to worry, because he would put him out of his misery soon. Swinging his sword shrouded in orange energy, he used leap attack. Kiri turned around and asked Debo what he was doing. Debo instantly found himself behind the guy, and he exclaimed in amazement. Debo, frowning, asked what she thought he was doing. He said he was playing with him. He swung his halberd, cutting down his opponent, blood gushing from his mouth. The guy in the armor swore. He threw quick strikes with his spear, which Debo dodged. Using slash blast, he swung his halberd. The guy, losing his balance, stamped his foot. Jumping back, he asked why he was so strong. Kiri said she was disappointed. Shoulden approached the guy from behind, backwards, sent flying by the blow. The guy dodged and Shoulden fell to the ground. Kiri, with her leg raised, asked if this is what they call the elite. The veins on the guy's face bulged, and he clenched his teeth and swore. William said that it looks like he can't stay away any longer. Pulling the magic bow, he said that they would not go any further, and they had already spent too much time on them. Debo thought in amazement that it was a fire arrow. The fiery arrow was rapidly approaching his face. He thought in amazement that it was faster than the boss. There was a strong explosion. William asked with a smile if he was relaxed because it was a fire arrow. He said his fire arrow was on another level, but he couldn't dodge it even if he knew it. There was a fire burning among the grass, and he said that everything was fine, and they should start clearing the dungeon. William suddenly opened his eyes. The main character stood next to Debo, surrounded by flames. Frowning, he looked at him. William asked who he was. Al Palm pointed forward with a finger shrouded in blue energy. Pointing to the side, he said that there was another guest there. A pig was approaching the opponents, quickly running through the tall grass. William and the guy turned around in shock. A herd of monsters ran out of the grass. Opening its mouth, the monster screamed loudly. He fell to the ground in front of William. Wiping his face, he said that he was really troublesome. Running after something like this on them, he called out to Gerald. Gerald, breathing heavily, apologized. There were a lot of dead pigs in front of them, and he said that he had just finished on his side. William said they don't have time to regroup. He offered to chase him right away. Remembering Al Palm, he thought that if they somehow got out of this gate, this situation would become his headache. He thought he was a problem person. The wind shook the tall grass, and someone called out to him and said that he saw footprints here. William, if they see the man in the cloak first, keep him there and he will take care of him himself. The feather on his chest glowed with light, and he said that in this gate there could be no one stronger than him. Sunlight shone through the foliage of the trees. Debo, laughing, asked if they saw their faces at the very end. He said he didn't know if they would survive being trampled by those pigs. The main character said that they will not die so easily, and, in addition, they need to walk more carefully, because there may be traps here. Debo said he is very careful. He asked why he didn't end them on the spot when he could have just seized the moment. Al Palm said that he is stronger than him. Debo exclaimed in amazement. The main character thought about that fiery arrow. He remembered how the fiery arrow was approaching Debo. He used a fire arrow and it shot forward. The explosion from the collision of the fire arrows threw Debo aside. The main character held a staff in his hands, surrounded by flames scattering in the air. A fire arrow flew out from the explosion. Al Palm opened his eyes in amazement. A bead of sweat ran down his face, and he thought that his fire arrow had barely parried its trajectory, and it had no effect on his fire arrow at all. Debo smiled nervously and said that he couldn't be stronger than him. The main character asked why he would joke about this. Debo asked if they really just ran away then. Al Palm said yes. He removed the bracer from his left hand. He said it seemed like the circle had expanded to its limit. Clenching his palm into a fist, he said that depending on its thickness, even when using the same magic, there will be a difference in speed and power. He said that since he was at the top of the second circle, they should have been equal or further stronger than him. The protagonist said that, however, his magic was something beyond his understanding, and judging by the fact that he was able to enter the gate, he must also be the second circle. He said that without a doubt, he somehow managed to strengthen his skill. He said that it was fair to say that he was the strongest adventurer in the gate right now. Debo exclaimed in amazement. He asked what they should do then, and should they try that tactic with the hobs. The main character said that it won't be that easy because hobs are different from simple ribbon pigs, and they can understand that they are their enemies and use it against them. Kiri asked what they were talking about and if they understood the situation they were in now. Frowning her brows, she said that the most important part was that the Black Wizard's follower was hiding among the Cygnus Knights, and the fate of the Maple World depended on this important information. She said they had to get outside quickly first, holding the hilt of her sword with a trembling hand. She said that they should forget about clearing this gate. The main character said that it was pointless. Debo asked what he meant. Kiri frowned and said that was to be expected considering he was a slave. She asked if he still wanted the small reward for the cleanup. Alpom asked what she was going to do after alerting the people outside. He asked if she really thought this was the best way to get rid of them. He said that he would suggest not to look down on them. He said that these followers had been hiding for hundreds of years, growing their roots. The protagonist said that revealing them would do nothing but cut off the branch and they needed to dig deeper. He said that if they want to hide, no one will be able to find them, and they will become a parasite that devours the Maple World from where no one can see. Kiri clenched her teeth in anger. Grabbing him by the collar, she shouted that this wouldn't work. She asked what he suggested they do then. She yelled at him not to say anything stupid without a plan because they were being chased right now and they needed to get out of here. Smiling, Alpom said that they should let them know. Taking her by the wrist, he said that they would show them who the real hunters were here. The sun was shining on the grass in the forest. Someone was running through the forest, stepping on the grass. Sholden fled among other adventurers. He said they needed to find them quickly and if they escaped from this gate they would be killed. Debo, appearing behind him, swung his halberd. Smiling widely, he said hi. He swung his halberd and Sholden ducked, gritting his teeth. The guy shouted that they were stupid and they actually came to them on their own. He said that this time he would definitely kill them. The rope was cut. The log hit the guy in the back. Kiri stood next to the cut rope, swinging his halberd. Debo asked if he really thought he could look away so easily. He struck with a halberd and the man, striking with a dagger, told him to die. Debo dodged his attack. The man exclaimed in amazement. Debo kneed him hard in the face. He let go of the halberd's handle. First he punched him in the face, then in the stomach. He continued to throw quick punches and kicks. He punched him hard in the face and blood gushed out. A girl with blonde hair was aiming a crossbow. She asked in amazement what was happening. Kiri jumped to attack her from behind. The girl dodged, ducking in time. Kiri swung her blade again, and the girl dodged at the last moment. Kiri swung her sword, which was covered in yellow energy. The girl blocked the attack with the crossbow, gritting her teeth. Calling her trash, Kiri angrily told her that she shouldn't look away because she was already very angry. A gust of wind blew a few leaves off the trees. William said that it looks like they have started, but he is curious about something. Looking at the silhouette opposite him, he asked if they were waiting for them. The wind blew the hair and clothes of the main character. The flames engulfed their staffs, and William, laughing, said that it was time for them to start too. Smiling madly, he used a fire arrow. The main character did the same, summoning 2 fiery arrows. A fiery arrow flew through the air. There was an explosion and Elpom ran to the side. Frowning, he turned around. Using a fire arrow, he shot at William. William, his eyes bulging in a crazy smile, exclaimed enthusiastically. An explosion thundered, and the main character covered his hand from the shockwave. Smoke surrounded him. He looked deep into the cloud of smoke. Suddenly something flew out of the smoke, rapidly approaching his face. Elpom, dodging, thought in amazement that it was a stone. William, standing behind him, asked if that was all. Using a fire arrow, he swung his staff. The flames burned among the trees. William's silhouette was visible among the fire. The main character, frowning, held a flaming staff in his hand. William, standing opposite him, asked how he had just cancelled it. He said with a smile that it was unexpected and he was sure that he did not have the power to block it. He asked how he did it. The main character looked at him silently, frowning, clutching the staff in his hand. William said that he didn't seem to be very talkative, but they still wouldn't be able to have a carefree conversation in the middle of a fight. Shooting a fiery arrow, he said that he would figure it out himself. Palm stared intently at the approaching flames. Using his revolver, he shot a spinning arrow of fire. William opened his eyes in shock. Looking at his fire arrow, he thought that he was using telekinesis to spin the fire arrow, and that was the word drill piercing his magic. A twisting fire arrow pierced his fire arrow, and he thought that he had never seen anything like it. A powerful explosion thundered among the trees. William said that he couldn't believe that he was exerting his skill using telekinesis. There was a flaming crater between them, and he said that he was the type of person that is called a genius. Smiling widely, he said that this is the type of people he hates the most. Shooting a fiery arrow, he offered to have more fun and told him to show more of what he could do. The ring on the protagonist's fist sparkled with blue light. He raised a shield of stones in front of him. A fiery arrow pierced the stone shield, and the main character jumped to the side. William, laughing madly, asked what he was doing and whether hiding was all he could do. Palm directed his palm shrouded in blue energy at his opponent. A fiery arrow flew over William, and he crouched down and asked when he did it. The main character waved his hand. The fire arrow changed its direction, turning 180 degrees. The arrow spun in a circle around William, who hastily dodged, jumping from side to side. The veins on his forehead were very bulging. Shooting a fiery arrow, he shouted that this was enough games. The fiery arrow was approaching the main character. Palm used his revolver again. A strong explosion thundered in front of him. William, grinning, said finally. Once behind him, he asked about the fact that he had fired both of his shots. The ring on his finger glowed green. A green magic circle appeared in front of his face and he used poison breath. The main character turned around in amazement. A stream of green gas shot out in all directions. Green fog filled the forest air. William, stepping forward, said that poison breath is useful, but it leaves the caster open while casting. He asked if he wasn't a fire and telekinesis user. He said with a grin that he thought he could seal his attacks if he could force his fire arrow to be on cooldown. The main character dropped the staff on the ground and William said that now he will not be able to do anything for the next 30 minutes. Taking his dagger out of its sheath, he said that his fire arrow was also on cooldown, so he apologized for killing him with the dagger. He said with a smile that this was his favorite moment and he couldn't wait. William, laughing madly, said that he was very curious to know what his face looked like, filled with despair. He asked if he would cry, if he would tremble. Palm, standing right in front of him, swung his fist. The vein in his fist bulged with tension. William opened his eyes wide in shock. The main character hit him powerfully in the face with his fist. The impact caused blood and teeth to fly out of William's mouth. Palm's brows furrowed. William, his mouth wide open, flew away from the blow. Some time ago, Iber asked how they did it. He asked how they were able to overcome the venom of the crazy poisonous mushroom, and couldn't he tell now that his boss wasn't around? He told him to tell him and he would pay the bill. Debo laughingly said that even if he did it would be pointless and it wasn't something they could do just because they wanted to. He said he called it room and it's a skill using telekinesis to suck and trap the air. He said that at the moment when he thought that they were finished, he sucked up all the poison in this large area. Iber asked, "Isn't that just cheating?" Debo, laughing, said that he also talks about this. He said that his boss is a straight-up cheat character. The main character struck William with strong blows with his fists, elbows and legs. With his mouth wide open, William tried to use poisoned breath. Palm hit him with an uppercut, preventing him from finishing. At the same moment, he swung the fist of his other hand. He threw quick punches at his torso. William flew to the side, hitting his back against a tree. The main character picked up the staff from the ground using telekinesis. He took the staff in his hand. He pulled a magical bowstring with a fiery arrow. William was sitting on the ground, leaning his back against the tree. He opened his eyes wide, frowning. A fire arrow shot through him, snapping the tree behind him in half. The severed hand fell to the ground, trembling. William screamed, and the ring on his hand flashed green. Green gas shot towards the main character. Blue energy enveloped the protagonist's palm. He used room and blue energy enveloped the poisonous gas. Looking down, he thought that he was acting as if he had gone crazy but was actually pursuing some goal. Looking at the staff lying on the ground, he thought that since his poison breath was not working, perhaps he was trying to get his staff back. Raising his hand, Alpum mentally told him to try, because he would end him at that very moment. A stream of fiery energy appeared behind him. A stream of flame knocked him off his feet. The main character opened his eyes wide in surprise. There was an explosion, and there was a fiery magic circle above the laughing William. He, bulging his eyes, said that he would tear him to pieces. The bracelet on his wrist glows yellow. His spell left a large mark in the ground, surrounded by flames. The main character coughed up blood. He thought that he was letting his guard down. Looking at the flame magic circle, he thought that he had not expected that he had been hiding the flame orb all this time, and he would not have made such a mistake if it was before his regression. Several fireballs were quickly approaching him, and he thought that he had lost his touch. A powerful explosion thundered, and Debo opened his eyes in amazement. Holding the beaten Shulden by the collar, he turned around. Kiri swung his blade, shrouded in yellow energy. She cut off the head of the guy with the spear. Frowning, she told Debo to stop playing around and get it over with, because his opponent was too strong to handle alone. Debo angrily told her not to order him, because that's what he was going to do. Blood sprayed, the arrow pierced Shulden's eye, and Debo's mouth fell open in amazement. The green feet of the monsters stepped onto the ground. Many goblins armed with swords and crossbows were approaching them. Debo, gritting his teeth, said he was wondering why they weren't there. Kiri said to focus and they would finish this quickly. Debo said not to underestimate them, because they are not that easy to deal with. One of the monsters hit the ground with his staff. A monsters rushing towards the wooden throne stopped. Debo said that among them there is one strange one. A monster dressed in black sat on the throne. He grinned wickedly. William, surrounded by intense flames, panting, asked if he had finally died. His eyes were very red and blood was gushing from his mouth. Bloody vomit poured from his mouth. Smirking, he said that he would admit it, because he wasn't bad, and he didn't expect it to bring him to this point. He asked if he should have asked his name before killing him. He heard a voice among the flames that said, El Palm. William, waving his staff, exclaimed that this could not be. Stepping forward, the main character told him to remember it. Surrounded by flames, he said that this was the last name he would hear in his life. William, grinning, said that it was useless, because even if he tried to bluff his way out of this, his abilities were not that good. El Palm said that he gave up on that. Holding a stone glowing orange in his hand, he said, it'll be near impossible to catch him with just 2 circles. William asked in amazement about Mana Stone. Laughing, he exclaimed that he was crazy. He asked if he had laid down his clothes to absorb the Mana Stone to circle up. Laughing loudly, he shouted that just absorbing the Mana Stone won't make him circle up. What he needs is enlightenment through countless experiences. A pulse of yellow and blue energy surrounded the protagonist, and he agreed with it. Smiling nervously, William exclaimed in amazement. Blue energy surrounded El Palm's wrist. A third circle appeared on his hand and he told him not to worry because he already had more than enough. Shooting fire arrows, William asked if he was trying to scare him with his bluff again. He shouted at him to die. 2 fiery arrows were approaching the main character. He frowned decisively. Using a spell, he shot a fiery arrow. A fiery arrow quickly cut through the air. William's bracelet flashed yellow and he used flame orb. The ring on the protagonist's finger sparkled with blue light. His fire arrow began to spin quickly in the air. William opened his reddened eyes wide. The fiery arrow was quickly approaching his head. William screamed, mouth wide open. There was a huge explosion and he shouted the name El Palm. The flames burned among the trees. The main character stood covered in ash and blood. He glanced at the remains of William's body surrounded by flames. Elpam quietly exclaimed, saying that he forgot to ask his name. While Elpam was finishing up with a strong opponent, Kiri and Dibwa were also facing someone very strong. These were hobgoblins that were walking around the forest here and there, looking for those who had fled from the battlefield. They were looking into the bushes, behind the trees and looking around the area. Kiri and Dibwa were sitting behind one of these trees at the time, and Dibwa's hand was on Kiri's shoulder, because she was supporting him so that he would not fall. She was watching the situation tensely, listening and looking out from there, hoping that they would not be noticed. Kiri cursed in her mind. A few minutes earlier, a battle had broken out between the hobgoblins and Dibwa and Kiri. Dibwa was furiously dealing with the hobgoblins, swinging here and there with his halberd. He raised his weapon with loud shouts once again, counting his defeated opponents, whose heads he had already managed to cut off, with amusement on his face. His movements were precise and fast. Dibwa had already gotten used to the halberd, so his speed increased significantly. After a while, his counter of killed hobgoblins reached 17. Kiri turned around in confusion, looking at Dibwa with incomprehension, while she also fought one of the hobgoblins. Kiri held back the monster's attack with her sword, wondering in her mind, why Dibwa dealt with their enemies so easily. Dibwa chuckled, shouting that it was easy. He frowned his brows and cursed loudly out loud, shouting that he guessed all their moves. The hobgoblin growled loudly, swinging his large fist at Dibwa. The monster was about to strike, but did not have time to hit the enemy, because Dibwa was much faster. He reached the desired point in a few movements, briskly pushing off the surface of the tree, and then with all the same joy pounced on the hobgoblin, counting the 18th killed enemy. The hobgoblin screamed in surprise, but this time the monster was lucky, because Dibwa was knocked aside by a sharp blow from the enemy in the form of a huge fireball. This fireball exploded along with Dibwa, forcing the hobgoblins in the area to duck so as not to suffer. This was the same Lord of the Earth among the hobgoblins. This main hobgoblin smiled slyly, watching what he did. Kiri looked in horror at what happened, shouted loudly, "Is this really an orbital flame?" The hobgoblin boss continued to sit on his throne, holding the magic staff in his hands, with which he managed to create a large magic circle, causing powerful streams of fire energy. Kiri wondered in horror, how could a monster use magic? Still, they managed to escape, and now Dibwa and Kiri were trying not to attract attention to themselves. Kiri thought that she would never have imagined that such a thing was even possible. She looked around warily, continuing to hold Dibwa. Kiri cursed in her mind, thinking that this was very bad. She realized that they would have to sit and quietly wait for Elpam to return so they could attack these goblins together. She thought that they could survive. However, while she was thinking about this, one of the hobgoblins appeared on the other side of the tree they were sitting behind. Thanks to her attentive night abilities, Kiri was able to react quickly and drag Dibwa away with her before the hobgoblin hit the ground where they were sitting. Once the monsters noticed them, they were chased. Breathing heavily and still on herself, Dibwa ran forward, dodging the attacks of the advancing enemies. Suddenly, one of the hobgoblins appeared right in front of her, greatly frightening and surprising her. Kiri clicked her tongue loudly, but was not going to give up. She took Dibwa by the hand, forcefully throwing him into the air right above her. Dibwa flew for a while right above the battlefield, while Kiri dealt with the hobgoblin that stood in their way. As soon as she finished with that, she managed to catch Dibwa falling down, shouting with displeasure that the enemies were climbing from all sides. She thought that they could still be defeated one by one, but what was happening now was really dangerous. Kiri's gaze suddenly widened, and she noticed something strange ahead. Kiri stopped in place, and right in front of her, a stream of flames rushed, which almost hit her and Dibwa, whom she carried like a princess. It was the same boss who could control magic. This monster laughed loudly, putting his staff forward and using all the power he had. Kiri thought with horror that she did not want to meet him now. She began to run in the opposite direction, while one of the fireballs created by this dungeon boss rushed right after them. The speed of this ball was much higher than the speed of the tired Kiri, who was also carrying her ally, so the ball soon reached them, exploding on the ground. The hobgoblin laughed loudly again, looking at the place where his ball hit. He exclaimed in surprise when he saw two silhouettes among the smoke where the explosion occurred. As the streams of smoke began to disappear, Dibwa appeared standing on his two legs. He was clutching his halberd, standing in front of Kiri who had fallen to the ground. Kiri looked at him in surprise, asking where he was going. But Dibwa did not answer her, only looking towards the opponents with an eerily calm look. Suddenly, he pushed off the ground, starting to rapidly approach the enemies, raising his halberd behind his back. Frightened by this, the hobgoblin boss pointed his finger at Dibwa, ordering his subordinates to attack him, and the hobgoblins unquestioningly began to carry out this order, rushing straight towards the enemy to deal with him. The two forces intended to clash, and they did. However, Dibwa was even more ferocious than in the battle between them before. He effortlessly cut through the monster's deeds by swinging his halberd. And when one of them was behind, Dibwa quickly reacted, and bending down, quickly cut through the body of this enemy as well. When the dungeon boss saw this, he became very tense. After all, he already thought that Roma was finished back then, when he first hit him with a fireball. And then the Lord of the Earth decided to use the same technique on Dibwa again. The hobgoblin leader thrust his magic staff forward, creating a huge energy fireball again. He directed it towards Dibwa with a loud exclamation. However, it was all useless. While Kiri was watching this fight from the side, she said in shock that she could not believe it, involuntarily wondering if Dibwa really had one circle. At this time, Dibwa, having avoided the attack, appeared right above the dungeon boss, surprising this monster, and then raised its halberd to deliver the finishing blow. But when his weapon was right next to the monster's face, the monster managed to use a magic move, throwing Dibwa away from itself. Dibwa flew back, landing right on Kiri, who caught him in midair. Still, he managed to injure the monster, so this monster was now starting to get angry. Its jaw dropped, and its eye was damaged. The dungeon boss's entire body was covered in trembling pain. The veins on the monster's face bulged, and it screamed loudly, creating another destructive ball right above its head. Dibwa was barely able to stand on her feet, but she was still able to hold the weapon. Kiri took a defensive stance, clutching her sword in her hands, telling Dibwa to rest, because she would handle this herself. The Lord screamed and sent that same fireball towards Kiri and Dibwa again. But as soon as it started to approach them, a more powerful energy pierced the attack, heading straight towards the dungeon boss, to the surprise of everyone present. The monster exclaimed in surprise, and its pupils reflected the dangerous something approaching it. This enormous force literally pierced the dungeon boss in the blink of an eye, depriving him of his body. In just a few seconds, the very dungeon boss that Dibwa and Kiri could not defeat was killed in the most shameful way. Kiri exclaimed in surprise, looking at what was happening. She never expected something like this to happen, so now, she was shocked by what she saw. It was the protagonists, who came to their aid as soon as he dealt with William. He thrust his wounded hand forward, using the ring of telekinesis and spinning his attack again with it. The solution said that it seemed like he arrived just in time. And even though his body was wounded, his spirit was still ready to fight. Outside the gate, everything was calm. Renko was sitting next to it, yawning sleepily. He said that it had been 3 days and there was still no news. He scratched his head, sitting on a log in a relaxed pose, and his sword was lying next to him. He said that he had not had a normal rest for a long time. Renko wanted to earn money and peace, but he was already tired of sitting around. He said that he was still not suited for such a job, so he would not agree to a simple guard anymore. Renko, surprised, drew his attention to the gate in which the protagonist was currently fighting, noticing the fuss next to it, so he wondered why people were running around there. Suddenly, the gate began to crack and crumble. Gradually, the space was collapsing, and the wood around the gate was literally torn apart and fell nearby. Renko, surprised, stood up from his usual place, asking what was going on. The gate was indeed opening, and this meant only one thing, and it was not good. Gate angrily called out to the men, shouting at them to bring healers in and quickly. Renko quickly began to approach him, asking Gate, what happened? He told him to report the situation. Gate turned to Renko, telling him that there were survivors. Gate said that they saw the gate disappear, which meant that the raid had failed. Renko shuddered, looking at those who came from the gate. He asked in surprise, "Are these survivors?" But the earth was lying Kiri, Dibu and Elpum, their bodies badly battered, covered in burns and wounds, dust and dirt. After a while, when they were carried to the safe place, Elpum opened his eyes, coming to his senses. He rose up on the bed, sitting up on it, asking, "Where is he?" Renko sat across from him, crossing his legs on the crate. He chuckled, saying that it seemed like Elpum had regained consciousness. Renko furrowed his brows, telling him with a serious tone to listen and answer his questions. He said that in this raid, which was assembled from the Ace team, only the 3 from the Gapper Guild survived. Renko asked Elpum, what happened in this gate? The protagonist was breathing heavily and answered Renko, repeating his words that only they survived. He bowed his head down, hugging his body with trembling hands and continuing to breathe heavily. The healer next to him began to use magic to heal his wounds. Elpum said sadly, saying that they all died after all. Renko with a serious tone in her voice told him to answer normally if he did not want to lose his life. The protagonist closed one of his eyes, saying that there was a demon inside. Renko screamed in surprise, asking, was it really a demon? Elpum asked if they had a pen and paper. He said he would draw it, and they gave him paper. Elpum said he didn't know his name, starting to draw a portrait of the one in the dungeon. Renko looked at what Elpum drew in surprise, and then closed his eyes saying it was true. After a while, the guild representatives gathered at a table inside a tent next to the dungeon gate. They were all shouting and dissatisfied, and someone shouted loudly that it was nonsense. Doriel shouted in dissatisfaction that there were 100 elite representatives from each guild. He waved his hands, lamenting that even if there were 100 people, it was still a red-level gate. He asked if they thought they would believe that they were all killed by monsters. He said that most likely, it was the survivors who did not meet the enemy. He was especially angry, because his cousin was there too. He clenched his fist as he said this. It was a representative of the Sky Guild named Doriel. Renko said that he didn't think they were lying. After all, the boss of this gate was these creatures. He took out the paper that Elpum had drawn the hobgoblin boss on earlier. Everyone immediately shouted in surprise, are these really hobgoblins? Immediately, the tent began to chatter. The guild representatives began, didn't they say that these creatures were able to use items? Someone even said that he heard that these creatures had high intelligence, so fighting them was as difficult as fighting an army of people. Another guild representative answered him, in that case, were there only 100 people facing them? That explained everything. Renko watched them from afar as these conversations continued between the representatives. One of the representatives scratched his mustache, chuckled loudly and said that he did not understand something. The man said that he did not know for the others, but did they think that their Natashas could not handle it? He released the mustache from his fingers, sitting at the table with an important look. It was the representative of the Goldrich Guild named Renko. Renko turned his gaze to him in surprise, asking what he meant by this. Renko wondered, was he asking because he really did not understand? He immediately answered that it must have been provocateurs. His gaze darkened, his expression became threatening. Renko said that if it was not a massacre inside, then such a conclusion would be delusional. He began to reason out loud that it was impossible to know what happened inside the gate, right? The Frenchman said that he had a bad feeling. He wondered out loud, was it someone's plan or an accident? All the guild representatives turned their attention to him, listening intently as Renko continued to speak, that as soon as he heard the news that there were only 3 survivors and all from the same group, that assumption immediately appeared in his head. Abis closed his eyes in irritation, smoking another cigar and said that he was tired of listening to this. He asked if this meant that Renko considered the Gapers to be traitors. Abis said that, according to the report, the survivors on their side had a third circle, and that was the only reason they were saved. Abis asked if that should not have been the end of it. Renko irritably pinched the end of his mustache with his fingers, asking in a cold voice, did he mean that their adventurers were more capable than those of other guilds? Abis said that he did not come there just to chat. Renko sarcastically said that if they had so much talent, they would not be hanging around at the bottom of the top 10 guilds. Abby's told him that they were just starting to climb. He told him that the list would gradually change, but they could already make room. They continued to argue with smiles on their faces while the rest of the group awkwardly watched. Renko thought that they should end it here. Renko crossed his arms over his chest, saying that given Abby's words, he should have proof, right? Abby's asked him, "What proof are you talking about?" He took the cigar out of his mouth and said with a serious expression that to begin with, not a single item was taken out of the pervert, so they had no motive. Elpam bowed to Renko, saying that they would go. He thanked him for his treatment, while Kiri helped Dibwa stay on his feet, walking away. Renko agreed with him and told them to take care of themselves. He watched them go silently, and Gate, placing his hand on his waist, asked Renko if they could just let them go. Renko asked himself with a serious expression, was he right? The forest was quiet. The protagonist and his new team were walking through the forest, tired after a long battle. Suddenly, Elpam noticed a snail behind a tree. They all stopped together, and Kiri asked, was it really following them? The snail crawled out from behind the tree with a friendly smile, looking at them. Some time ago, when they were still in the dungeon, Kiri asked the protagonist, what was he thinking about? Back then, everything was engulfed in flames, everything around was burning. Kiri told him that they destroyed the followers of the black mages and the hobgoblins too. The entire monster settlement was also burning, as was the forest around. Kiri continued to say that now they should throw away all the items, hurt each other and exit the gate, right? They looked at each other while everything around was burning. The protagonist's gaze became serious. In his bag on his belt was the same feather that he got from William. Elpam was lost in his thoughts, thinking that they had indeed defeated the boss and thrown away the loot. However, the item that William had was called a phoenix feather. It was a powerful energy contained in just one feather. Elpam thought that simply having this in his possession would increase the power of fire magic by a third, and unlike other items, the effect of this one was cumulative. The protagonist thought that he now understood why all the adventurers here had died before the regression. He judged with a serious expression that this was quite an unexpected find, so he had to be sure to take this one with him. Kiri warned him that if they took anything other than the original items with them, they would be suspected of instigation. She told him with a serious expression that Elpam himself had said so. Kiri told him to abandon his useless greed and follow the plan. After all, they had already found the exit gate. Indeed, they were standing at the exit gate, and everywhere everything was engulfed in flames that did not stop burning for a second. Suddenly, a small flower appeared in the midst of this terrible flame. Elpam and Kiri looked at it in surprise, wondering, could it really be a snail? It was a pet snail, and unlike normal snail monsters, this snail did not attack and had a habit of collecting items by finding everything by smell. These little helpers used their houses as a warehouse, so this snail had a unique ability in which it could increase the size of its house as it collected things. The protagonist put this snail on his shoulder, and the snail began to dig around in the small house to find the desired item. After a few moments, the snail took out the very same phoenix feathers that the protagonist managed to take from William. Elpam smiled, and the snail exclaimed happily, looking at this. Kiri said with displeasure that the protagonist had still managed to carry those feathers unnoticed. Kiri asked him how he knew about the snail's ability. Elpam calmly answered her, putting the feathers in his bag, that they were leaving anyway, so they had to try all options. Kiri said that they had done everything as he said, but what should they do next? She was still holding Dibwa so that he wouldn't fall, and the protagonist told her not to rush. Elpam said that, considering that the instigators had infiltrated the ranks of the Knights of Cygnus, they had to use the valuable information carefully, otherwise, they could lie low, and then they would never find them in their lives. Kiri asked in surprise, what did that mean in that case? Elpam answered her, looking away, that they had probably already been informed of everything, so they had to go. Oddborg was reading the report written on paper. He said that Janice's guild was destroyed, Maria's and Dick's too, Goldrich's, Elnad's and Sky's, there was no one left. Oddborg said irritably that the attack had failed, clutching a piece of paper in his palm. Baze kneeled her, holding her head down, and said that they had all been killed by the monster, and only 3 of the Gaper had survived. She said that at the meeting, they had spoken out about the suspicion of the instigators, but only the gaper had been mentioned. But due to lack of evidence, they had been found innocent. Bays said that despite the failure, the identities of their people had not been revealed, so they should prepare for next time. It was raining outside, and Iborg stood by the window, watching the lightning, while Bays knelt behind him. After a few moments, he asked her, "Have they really not been revealed?" Bays looked up in surprise, asking what he meant. He said that the plan was to eliminate everyone and then go after the boss. Iborg said that it was obvious that the three of them had met with William, but the man named Alpham didn't say anything about it. Bays said, "But why would they hide it?" She said that even if he exposed them, they couldn't be blamed since they had distributed their people among the guilds. Iborg said that there was still a reason to hide it. He wondered if Alpham suspected that there was someone guiding the followers of the black mages from the shadows. He said that if they were the only ones who knew about it, what would happen if they decided to reveal this information? Bays was worried and shouted that they would be in danger in that case. She said that they needed to remove the people from the guild before they were exposed. However, Iborg said that it was an invitation. He laughed, turning to face Bays, saying that it was interesting, and he was willing to accept it then. Iborg also said that they should change the scene. It was still pouring outside, while Iborg continued to make his evil plans. He said that they needed to do this so that they would be the lucky ones who would know the truth. At this time, lightning flashed over the 50-person gate, which was cut with marks of people who entered it. Diving into Debo's memories of his past life before regression, anyone can understand that it was hell. After the start of Judgment Day, monsters that came out of the dungeon roamed everywhere, destroying everything that was in their path. Debo remembered that people living in extreme poverty considered the manifestation of human qualities a luxury. His gaze was filled with despair, because every day he was forced to watch his sister suffer and slowly die from black blood diseases. In his dying agony, he regretted not being able to protect his only family member. Debo was kneeling, all his clothes were badly tattered, and there were numerous wounds and roughly healed scars all over his body. Right at his feet lay a small bough that must have once belonged to his sister. It was an endless hell. In a moment of despair, when Debo no longer expected anything good, Archon appeared in his life. She asked with a smile, was there really someone still alive? She stood in the rift of the building where Debo was imprisoned, jokingly saying that it seemed like he had a hard time. Archon squatted on her paw of the monster, asking if Debo needed help. At this time, the monster looked inside this destroyed room, gobbling huge eyes right at them. Debo frowned at him, and coldly replied that she should leave from there. This was his first meeting with Archon. But fate had it that Debo eventually left this place with her, and now they were fighting monsters side by side. One day the monster growled loudly, teeth, but Debo quickly dealt with it using his weapon, shouting with excitement that he won. One of his team members said happily that he was short 30 seconds. After all, they had already settled accounts with their share of the monsters. The girl from his team replied that it seemed that the person responsible for the dishes for today had been found. She put her sword behind her back, saying that Debo was showing off too much. Debo shouted in annoyance when he heard and saw this. As soon as everyone dealt with the monsters, Archon turned around, cheerfully saying that everyone was gathered. She praised them, asking if they could go. While her team members dealt with the monsters one by one, Archon stood on a whole pile of dead souls stacked on top of each other. Her contribution to the team, and this battle was obvious. 1 year, that was enough time for Debo to change his principles. He looked at his teacher with a happy expression, proud of what he was doing. Archon was a cold-blooded, but pleasant heroine who always protected them and cleared the way for others. Looking at her, Debo himself began to look at the world differently, and tried to help her in everything. The man, who was a member of the team, laughed, saying, "What do you mean?" Debo was on duty from the most closed mind to the testing cave. Debo answered with anger and awkwardness that he simply did not prepare properly. He shouted at his comrade to stop laughing. The man responded with a laugh, saying that the great Debo could not just lose. The man threw his weapon over his shoulder, smiling, telling Debo that he called himself Archon's student, so if he wanted to become famous, then maybe he should work a little? Debo said, offended that he had not said that. While the two were arguing, Archon and Shannon continued to walk forward. Turning to her, Archon asked if they should go there. Shannon pointed her finger in the right direction, saying that she had seen the trace left by her brother earlier. Archon said that the atmosphere there was a little different. The cave they were entering now really looked creepy, unlike their previous location. Archon asked if there was such a place under Mount Elnas. But they still moved on. How did they get there? The thing is, a few days ago, Shannon came to the headquarters where Archon's team was gathering, starting to beg her, tell her that the abandoned mines of Mount Elnas are too dangerous, therefore, you can't go down there alone. She explained that no one wants to go there with her, but she needed someone strong to find her brother. She stood before Archon, her hands folded in a pleading gesture, looking at her with pitiful eyes, around which bags had formed from fatigue. That such request should not be addressed to her, after all, she did not take personal errands. Her stern gaze was directed at Shannon when she said that, besides, Shannon asked to take her with him, and that was pure madness. Archon said that Shannon might have known the way, but with the skills of the third circle, she would have gotten in the way. Archon said that she herself should have known that. Shannon lowered her tear-filled eyes downwards when Archon said that there was no guarantee that her brother was still alive, so she should look for other adventurers. Suddenly, Dibwa, who was also in the room, turned to Archon, asking her forgiveness for interfering. He said that he thought that for Shannon, they were the last hope. Archon turned around, looking at him, and Dibwa explained to her that there had been no adventurers in the Cave of Trials since the Day of Judgment. He shouted that he wanted to help her. His gaze was determined, and Dibwa said that if he would take her safety on himself, would they agree to think about her request again? In the cave they came to, ash and smoke from something burning were flying everywhere. The team gradually walked inside it, and then came across the corpse of one of the adventurers. Archon asked Shannon if it was him. Shannon told her that it was not her brother. Archon thoughtfully said that it must be good. And Naz looked at the corpse with interest, wondering what he died of. Archon said that it did not look like the wounds from monsters. Archon said that she had a feeling that he died a week ago. Suddenly a dark shadow loomed over them and someone from the team suddenly shouted out that it seemed like, if he remembered correctly, it should be it. Something heavy fell from the ceiling of the cave, destroying what was on the floor in an instant. Debo spoke up in surprise, asking what was going on. He held Shannon in his arms, his eyes squeezed shut. He was horrified at his assumption, looking up at the monster they were now about to fight. Debo cursed loudly when he saw the shape of the monster, shouting that it was Azikam. The monster immediately began to attack the adventurers, extending its long arms. Debo rushed to protect Shannon, shouting at her to run back. Archon quickly cut off the monster's arm with her weapon before Debo could, calling out loudly to him and saying that they would be on the left. Her face immediately became serious, she gripped her weapon tighter in her hands, continuing this battle. Shannon remained sitting on the floor of the cave, while Debo also rushed to attack, shouting with a smile that they must finish it. All the team members headed towards Azikam, intending to defeat this monster. Numerous arms, as if made of stone, continued to be born from this monster, while the adventurers tried to cut off each of these arms. While they were fighting, Shannon hid from the attacks of the monster, using a protective circle. Suddenly, she noticed a small passage in the cave and decided to go there. After a while, the monster was defeated. Debo was breathing heavily, holding onto his halberd, and said that the rumors were true, because the monster was really tough. The girl from their team turned around, asking if anyone saw Shannon. She paced nervously and Debo shouted in surprise, asking what it meant. There was only a small hairpin she used on the floor of the cave. This hairpin was right in front of the ominous passage where Shannon had gone. Debo picked up the hairpin, saying that it couldn't be, how could she go there alone? He cursed loudly, shouting that it was too presumptuous. Confronted her, telling everyone together. She said that she didn't know what it was, but she could feel a strong energy coming from there. Debo asked her in surprise, is there something else inside? Replied that it seemed so, but she couldn't say for sure. One thing she was sure of, this creature was very strong and dangerous. Debo immediately said with confidence that he would find her. He said that it was his responsibility to protect Shannon, so they should all stay there. He lowered his head down, feeling guilty inside him. Alina and his team members told him to calm down, asking, didn't he hear R? Suddenly R answered that she would go too. Debo's eyes widened in surprise when he heard it. R said that whatever was inside, it was threatening the world of Maple. R confidently turned towards this mysterious passage, throwing her weapon over her shoulder, and said that eliminating threats was her job. So they decided that they would all go together. All the team members moved on, passing into this mysterious place. Inside this part of the cave, everything was literally on fire. On both sides of the narrow path were two pools of hot lava. Right in the middle of this eerie place grew a huge tree, the branches of which were wrapped in chains. At the foot of this tree, Shannon sat, bowing her head over the dead body of her brother. Debo called out to her in surprise as they entered, trying to get her attention by shouting her name. Shannon was crying next to her dead brother, and when Debo saw it, he wondered in surprise, is that a corpse? Shannon gently touched her brother's face with her fingertips, saying under her breath, that was her brother. What they saw did not inspire confidence in Archon. She furrowed her brows again, looking at her. Debo cursed in his mind, and then called Shannon's name again, shouting at her to sit there, because he was coming soon. Shannon began to smile suspiciously, while tears rolled down her cheeks. She turned to Debo, telling him that she knew he would definitely come, because he was kind. However, she added that she could not leave there. Her gaze was filled with some strange madness. Debo asked her, surprised, what was she saying? Shannon called him by name, asking him if he knew what Zachem meant. She said it was the devil's tree. Many believe that Zachem was a moving tree, but in reality, it was only a vessel that held the true Zachem, and the true Zachem was this enormous tree in front of them. The enormous tree she sat at the foot of was their true enemy. Shannon said that they still hadn't fought the monster. Debo called her name again, asking what she was saying. Archon calmly thanked her for the information, saying that she had no idea that this was the monster's true body. Archon held her hand up to the side, stopping Debo, and told Shannon not to worry, that she would figure it out. Archon started moving towards that demon tree along the narrow path between the lava lakes, saying that it was very dangerous there, so Shannon needed to leave there quickly, because she could be crushed by a falling tree. She asked her, maybe she wanted to test her bones for strength. Archon pulled her eyebrows together, saying that then her brother's death would be in vain. Shannon pulled out the mana sphere from her brother's side, when Archon asked her, does she understand what she means? Shannon said that everything had already started, as soon as they got there. She squeezed the sphere in her hands, continuing to cry. The sphere began to crack little by little, and Shannon said that behind the computer was a being that penetrates and controls, and does not stand like a statue. Suddenly, Miria pointed her weapon at Debo, piercing him through, causing him to cough up blood. Archon turned around in surprise when she saw this, and the second member of their team also pointed a gun at her, approaching her with it. Debo cleared his throat, turning to his battlemate, asking her, what is she doing? He widened his eyes in shock when he noticed the state Miria was in. Her eyes were so filled with anger that they were completely red, and she, gritting her teeth, screamed in rage that it was he who killed her friends. Shannon screamed that it was useless, because in their eyes they were just a target to take revenge on. A crazy smile played on her face, and she screamed that now the end has come. Another moving Zachem emerged from the molten lava lake, slowly making its way out. Shannon screamed that they had to finish this show off in the best possible way. Her eyes turned as dark as Miria's and her hair turned white as she screamed in delight that it was all for the black mage. There was an explosion. Debo cursed in his mind, wondering if they were possessed by the Zachem. His body shook from the wound he had received and he clenched his teeth to try and numb the pain. Debo held his wound, watching what was happening around him. Archon called his name, screaming at him to stop standing there, they had to finish. Miria grinned evilly, towering over Debo, and her entire body was surrounded by some mysterious black energy, and Debo looked at it and shouted that he knew about it. Archon used her skill, which was called Adrenaline Charge. She swung her weapon, directing all of its power at their enemy, which was a monster that had taken the form of a tree. With an explosive strike she cut through part of it, cutting off several branches of the tree. Debo cursed again in his mind, gritting his teeth. Archon's powerful strikes continued to spread as she fought. He cursed again in his mind, thinking that it was his fault. Among the rubble on the floor of the cave, one of his teammates was lying, his body long gone from life. Debo thought that if he hadn't led them there, then none of this would have happened. With loud screams, forgetting about the pain, Debo began to run towards the enemy in the form of his friend, thinking that this was all because of him. He hit his halberd right into Miria, causing her to cough up blood. He apologized to her, but Miria had no intention of giving up. She extended her hand towards Debo's face, intending to attack, but Debo quickly cut her body, splitting it in half. In the last moment before her death, Miria extended her hand, touching Debo's face with her fingertips. She died as a human, thanking Debo for this and asking him to take care of Archon with a smile on her face. Debo clenched his teeth, filled with pain not only physical, but also mental. At this time, Archon continued to fight their main enemy, who possessed destructive power. She pushed off the ground, flying closer to the tree and asking, "Is this really his body?" Pushing off the floor and swinging, she hit the tree, the trunk of which was covered in numerous eyes. There was an explosion, but the monster tried to attack her again, using huge stone hands, causing Archon to click her tongue, greeting her teeth. She jumped to the side, dodging the blow of the monster and ending up right above this huge statue. Debo also arrived there at this time, shouting at Archon that they should destroy it together. It was their common battle. With loud battle cries, they began to strike one after another at this stone statue. But it was not so easy. One of the hands of the statue, which was controlled by Zakum, met with Debo. It was a strong confrontation. He cleared his throat, cursing loudly out loud, trying to hold off the onslaught. Shannon was watching this all this time from behind, and as soon as she saw that Debo was in a precarious position, she immediately began to run at him with a dagger, shouting that it was a beautiful performance. Her face was distorted with madness even more, but she did not have much time left. Archon, who saw this, immediately came to the rescue and literally cut through the restless Shannon. Shannon's lifeless corpse fell to the floor of the cave, and Archon moved on and said that only this statue remained, which they were fighting with now. Debo screamed in surprise when he saw it, asking why it did not collapse. His vision suddenly began to blur, and then he felt something strange in his head. His mind was pierced by pain, and he began to scream, dropping his weapons from his hands and squeezing his head by the sides. Archon loudly called his name, asking, "Is he also under the influence now?" Debo cursed loudly, screaming that he did not want this and asked Archon to kill him quickly. The powerful power of the demonic tree penetrated deep into his consciousness, corroding it at a high speed. He screamed for her to do it before he could do anything.
This concludes the latest chapter, and we will be continuing it from here in the next episode.